Hi everyone. Tonight, we step into a winter so harsh it might end you in a single night if you were left outside wearing only a modern fleece jacket. Picture snow piled like pale waves against bark-covered walls, the forest creaking under heavy ice, and a river frozen hard like glass. You pull your shoulders inward against the cold, because this is the world of the longhouse, a structure shaped like a wooden ribcage, where dozens of people gather together and somehow avoid becoming frozen figures by morning. Before you settle in, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I create here. And if you do, share your location and local time in the comments. I like seeing who's still awake out there. Now, lower the lights. You make your way toward the longhouse, and the first thing you notice is its sheer size. These are not small, cozy cabins. They stretch out like overturned ships, often 60 or even 100 feet long. The Iroquois Confederacy alone built some so enormous you might wonder if they were designed for people or giants. Wooden poles rise like ribs, bent inward and tied together, then covered with overlapping sheets of elm bark. Snow pushes hard against those bark panels, and you hear them groan and crack, but the walls hold. That's the first small miracle. No matter how much snow falls overnight, you're inside a structure that won't simply cave in and bury you. The second miracle is the faint light seeping through gaps near the roof. Fires glow along the central aisle, small, smoky, but steady. Without them, this place would be nothing more than a frozen grave. Archaeologists agree that longhouses used a line of central hearths, each shared by a pair of families. A well-established fact is that among the Haudenosaunee, several nuclear families formed a clan, and each clan claimed a section of hearth and sleeping platforms within the same longhouse. The fire is both practical and symbolic. It keeps you warm and connects you to a network of relatives who would notice if you stopped breathing during the night. Here's an interesting detail. Snow sometimes became part of the insulation. When storms hit, families didn't clear it away. Instead, they let drifts build up against the outer walls, like a natural blanket. It sounds backward. Snow feels cold, but it's mostly air trapped between ice crystals. That layer of still air clings to the bark and slows the cutting wind. If you've ever built a snow fort as a child, you know it can feel surprisingly warm inside. In that sense, the same storm that frightened you on the walk over is now helping to keep the longhouse livable. Even so, historians disagree on just how warm it really was. Some researchers argue the temperature inside stayed only slightly above freezing, just enough to prevent frostbite. Others suggest that with many bodies close together, fires burning and thick layers of hides, the interior could feel truly warm, perhaps even uncomfortably hot. People may have removed outer furs to sleep in softer skin garments. Scholars still debate whether longhouses were drafty shelters or unexpectedly efficient at holding heat. You'll probably never get an exact temperature, only descriptions shaped by memory, archaeology, and the lingering scent of burned wood. That smell hits your nose now. Smoke fills the air, thick enough to make you cough and rub your eyes. Longhouses weren't ventilated like modern homes. They had smoke holes above each hearth, small openings in the roof, but how well they worked depended on the wind. Sometimes the entire building filled like a giant pipe, and people had to lie close to the floor, where the air was clearer, to avoid the sting. You might wonder whether that smoke could suffocate you overnight. Yet, strangely, it's part of what keeps you alive. Smoke drives away fleas and lice, discourages mice, and helps limit certain disease carriers. It also dries meat and hides hung overhead. So yes, your lungs ache a little, but without that haze, you might wake up itchier, hungrier, and colder. The soundscape adds to the odd sense of safety. Outside, wolves howl in the forest. Inside, you hear the steady rhythm of snoring, the snap of sap in burning wood, and the soft creak of timbers expanding and shrinking. Children mumble in their sleep. Elders clear their throats. Sometimes someone chuckles quietly at a story shared before bedtime. All these sounds merge into a kind of survival lullaby. You're not alone. You're part of a human furnace. You slide your hand along the inner wall. It's rough, splintered bark, but warmer than you expected. Behind it are bundles of reeds or moss packed into gaps to block drafts. It's not flawless. You still feel a thin stream of icy air slip through, but compared to the outside, it feels almost luxurious. The whole structure seems to breathe with its occupants, exhaling smoke and drawing in just enough fresh air to keep everyone alive. When you finally lie down on a raised wooden platform covered with woven mats, the design makes sense. You're lifted off the frozen ground, wrapped in hides, with other bodies close by. You're enclosed in a shared space of human effort and endurance. Outside, snow drums against the bark. Inside, the bark holds. That's how you sleep, not in comfort as you know it, but in a rough, smoky, remarkable warmth carved from the forest. The hearth fires burn low in the darkness, casting stripes of orange light and shadow across the longhouse. You rub your arms and watch how each flame licks at the logs like a hungry tongue, steady, yet delicate. Without these small fires, everyone here would be claimed by the cold before morning. The longhouse isn't built around a single fire, but many of them, spaced carefully along the center aisle, each belonging to a family. Step too close and the heat surges. Step back and the chill returns, like islands of warmth scattered along a frozen river. A well-accepted fact is that these hearths served two purposes: cooking and heating. Archaeologists uncover long stretches of blackened soil at ancient village sites, clear traces of these fireplaces. Food and warmth were inseparable. A pot of corn soup simmering quietly provided both nourishment and rising steam, the two things your body needs most when the night grips you with icy hands. You don't just eat warmth. You inhale it. The curious part appears when you look up. Smoke doesn't simply disappear. It has to escape somehow. Longhouses had smoke holes cut into the bark roof, a practical solution that was never fully efficient. You see thin shafts of starlight cutting down through these vents, where smoke exits and, inconveniently, snow can enter. Families had to manage those openings carefully, shifting bark panels or plugging gaps when storms became severe. Imagine being assigned smoke hole duty, your nightly task to poke at a loose flap of bark above your head. It wasn't glamorous, but without it, everyone might choke in their sleep. And this is where historians continue to disagree. Some argue that these vents worked better than expected, creating a draft that pulled smoke upward like a chimney. Others claim the opposite, that longhouses were often so smoky you could barely see the rafters. One researcher even suggested that children and elders may have suffered constant coughs from living with smoke-filled air. Scholars continue to disagree about whether life inside a longhouse was tolerably smoky or nearly impossible to endure. You lean back, cough into your sleeve, and wonder which interpretation feels closer to the truth. Even so, the presence of smoke adds a sensory detail that cannot be dismissed. The air feels thick, yet strangely calming, similar to incense drifting through a cathedral. It settles on your skin, clings to your hair, and seeps into your clothing until the smell follows you everywhere. Perhaps that was the intention. Your scent became tied to your home, a marker of belonging. People approaching the village could often be recognized by smell alone, longhouse smoke versus the sharp cleanness of winter air. If you listen carefully, the fire seems to speak. Every crackle and hiss offers a quiet reassurance that the flames are still alive. The embers glow like watchful eyes, guarding the sleepers curled nearby. Over time, people learn to interpret these sounds without thinking. A loud pop signals sap bursting. A soft crumble suggests the log is hollowing from within. The fire lives, and because of it, so do. One small but practical detail stands out: how carefully families manage their fuel. You imagine hauling armloads of firewood before nightfall, stacking it close to the hearth like something precious. Running out during midwinter was not just inconvenient, it was dangerous. Some oral accounts describe people burning stripped bark or even dismantling abandoned structures when supplies ran low. You can almost hear someone rising quietly in the dark to add one more stick to the fire, muttering about how thin the woodpile looks. Your body warms on one side while the other remains cold. Fires in longhouses were not roaring bonfires, but small, controlled flames. Too large, and sparks could leap into bark walls or dry mats with disastrous results. Too small, and the cold would slowly return, stiffening fingers and toes. Achieving the right balance required judgment each night. Now imagine lying down as the fire burns low, smoke drifting lazily toward the roof. Your eyes grow heavy while sparks float upward like fireflies. You feel safe not because the fire eliminates the cold, but because it restrains it enough for rest. Outside, winter rages. Inside, the hearth continues to burn, as stubborn as you are. You ease yourself onto one of the sleeping platforms, and the change is immediate. Raised bunks line both sides of the longhouse, wooden planks fitted into the walls. Their height is a clever way to escape the cold grip of the ground. You notice what modern campers also know: cold settles low, while warmth rises. By climbing onto the platform, you move into the gentler layer of air where heat lingers. This is a well-established fact. Longhouses often included 2 or even 3 tiers of sleeping shelves, stacked like oversized bunk beds. Elders or families with higher status usually claim the middle level, not too close to the frozen floor and not directly beneath the smoky roof. Everyone understood their place, socially and physically, mapped along these wooden ledges. Here is a curious detail. Some sleeping mats were woven from bulrush or cattail, plants harvested from marshes and dried into springy bedding. Picture lying on a mattress made of pond weeds. It may not sound luxurious, but once covered with animal hides, it provided enough cushioning to prevent bruised hips. In fact, some travelers noted that these beds were unexpectedly comfortable, warm, and lightly scented from sweet grass woven into the mats. Your hand brushes the wall behind you, where reeds and moss are packed into every seam. Cold still whispers through tiny gaps, but the layered construction makes this raised corner almost cozy. Families added layers of fur, deer, beaver, sometimes several at once, until you could sink into them like a cocoon. As you pull one over yourself, the earthy smell of hides mixed with wood smoke becomes strangely comforting. Historians still debate how effective these raised bunks truly were. Some argue they were essential, keeping sleepers dry and significantly warmer. Others suggest that with so many people packed together, shared body heat may have mattered more than height. Still, archaeological evidence shows clear wear marks on upper platforms, confirming that people climbed up each night. These structures were not just storage, they were meant for sleeping. Above you, rafters hold baskets of dried fish and corn, hanging where smoke helps preserve them. This means you sleep beneath stored food, soothed by the faint rustle of kernels shifting in their husks. If hunger stirs, the smell of drying meat may tease you, but it also brings reassurance that this household has enough supplies to last through winter. The air carries a quiet chorus: wood creaking, the shuffle of relatives settling in, the distant bark of a dog outside. You press your ear into the fur and realize how insulated you are. The raised bunk lifts you from frozen ground. The mats soften the boards. The hides trap warmth, and the bodies around you give off heat like living embers. Still, nothing here resembles modern privacy. You share this narrow shelf with siblings, cousins, perhaps a grandmother snoring steadily nearby. Privacy was not considered essential. Survival mattered more. Shared warmth, shared breath, collective heat. You might complain about an elbow in your ribs, but that discomfort is far better than waking frozen on the floor. As sleep approaches, you feel thankful for the platform beneath you. Simple boards that separate life from death. Outside, the ground could freeze a spilled bucket solid. Inside, the bunk keeps you just high enough to remain human through the night. You shift slightly and feel bodies pressed close on all sides. A longhouse was never a place of personal space. It was a human quilt. You pull closer, shoulder to shoulder, hip to hip, and understand how practical this arrangement was. Anthropologists consistently note that communal sleeping was not merely social. It was essential insulation. In winter, every breath and heartbeat added warmth for someone else. Think of penguins huddled against Antarctic winds, rotating positions along the edge. The same principle applied here, though wrapped in bark walls and fur rather than feathers. If you have ever camped and noticed that a tent with 3 people warms faster than one with a single sleeper, you already understand the idea. Multiply that by 20 or 30 bodies, and the longhouse becomes its own microclimate. Some early European observers commented on how stifling the interior could feel. So much so that people sometimes removed layers even while snowstorms raged outside. This was not comfort by modern standards, but survival did not require comfort, only enough warmth. One final aside. Some accounts describe couples sleeping tightly under a single hide, with children wedged along the edges. This closeness was not just emotional, it was practical heat management. Infants and toddlers were rarely left alone. They slept between parents or grandparents, bodies forming a living barrier against the cold. Visitors sometimes expressed shock at the lack of spacing they considered proper. But within the longhouse, distance meant risk. A child separated by only a few inches could lose critical warmth before morning. Even here, scholars disagree. Some believe sleeping platforms were divided into family sections, with hides hung like curtains to provide limited privacy. Whether tightly packed or loosely divided, the principle remained the same. Warmth was shared, guarded, and never wasted. Others argue that privacy was often set aside in favor of collective survival. Sources disagree, leaving modern scholars to debate how people manage the tension between staying warm and maintaining personal space. It is easy to imagine the disputes. One person asking for a bit more room, another replying that extra space does nothing to stop frozen feet. The feeling of humanity is dense inside. Sweat, smoke, and the mild, musky scent of animal hide fill the air. It is far from clean, yet strangely stabilizing. You inhale and understand that this is the scent of persistence. Without deodorants, bathing, or airflow, the air takes on a presence of its own. Thick but alive. In an odd way, that smell confirms that life continues here. Living in close quarters also shaped relationships. You did not only listen to your cousin's stories by the fire. You felt their breath move the fur against your cheek as sleep came. Disagreements rarely lasted when everyone had to share the same coverings by night, and privacy was minimal. The entire household knew who wept quietly, who whispered prayers, who tossed and turned. In this way, the longhouse became both a forge for community and a shield against the cold. Consider the sounds. Slow, shared breathing. A baby's gentle cry. Someone shifting their hides. A cough echoing from one end. Each noise rebounds off bark and reeds until it blends into a familiar nighttime rhythm. The steady noise is comforting. Complete silence would signal trouble. There is one unusual detail noted by travelers. Some families trained their dogs to jump onto the sleeping platforms as well. The dogs curled around ankles or lay stretched along the edges, acting as extra sources of living warmth. Their fur held heat from the fire, and their presence calmed children frightened by the wind outside. You feel a cold nose press against your toes, and instead of irritation, you relax. This animal is a warming stone wrapped in fur, as much a part of the longhouse as the wooden beams. Not everyone welcomed such closeness. Some accounts describe frequent arguments caused by crowding, disputes over who took too many hides, who coughed all night, or whose feet wandered where they did not belong. Still, despite complaints, people returned each night to the same cramped space. Discomfort was accepted because the alternative was far worse. Better to tolerate a sibling's snoring than face the deadly cold of the forest. Ultimately, every part of this closeness shows adaptation. Modern readers may recoil at the lack of privacy, but survival reshapes priorities. You find yourself wondering what you would give up, the neat isolation of a private room, or the steady heat of 10 bodies gathered together. As you settle into the shared warmth, the decision is already made. The storm may rage outside, but inside, human presence becomes a blanket thicker than any fur. You close your eyes, pressed shoulder to shoulder with family, and understand that survival in the longhouse was never an individual effort. It was collective action, repeated each night, a shared rhythm that held winter at a distance. You wake briefly in the darkness, shifting beneath the weight of hides. The longhouse never truly sleeps. Embers crackle. A baby stirs. Somewhere, a dog shakes its coat, sending a faint tremor through the floor. You pull the coverings tighter and consider what these blankets really are. Not fabric or feathers, but animal skins layered again and again, deer, elk, beaver, even bear, stacked thick against the cold. Historians often point out the heavy dependence on pelts. Long before woven cloth or wool appeared, people had mastered the use of animal skins for warmth. These skins were not just blankets. They served as shelters, floor coverings, clothing, and tools for daily survival. The heat settling into your bones comes from animals that once moved through these same woods. What stands out is how hides were used beyond sleeping. Families stretched them along inner walls to block drafts, hung them as simple dividers, or draped them over doorways as heavy curtains. You can picture someone securing another bear hide over a gap where wind slipped through. Function dictated appearance. Nearly every surface was covered in fur, until the interior resembled the inside of a vast store of pelts. Here is an unexpected detail. Some furs were valued as much for texture as for insulation. Beaver pelts were soft and flexible, well suited for children. Bear hides, thicker and strongly scented, were associated with protection and strength. Oral traditions suggest that sleeping beneath a bear's skin carried spiritual meaning, as if the animal's endurance could pass to the sleeper. Imagine a child wrapped in fur, told that the bear's spirit would guard their dreams. The blanket served as both warmth and symbol. There is debate over how common certain pelts were. Researchers studying burial items and trade evidence disagree on whether bear hides were everyday bedding or reserved for select individuals. Some believe their size and rarity made daily use unlikely, while others point to repeated mentions in oral histories suggesting they were widely used. The issue may never be fully resolved, but the image remains of families wrapped in the layered strength of the animals they relied upon. You run your hand across a hide and notice its textures: coarse outer hair, softer underfur, and a slight oily feel that never fully fades. The scent is earthy, a reminder that the wilderness has been brought indoors. As you shift, the hides creak, heavy enough to feel like another body resting against you. Blankets were not the only contribution animal skins made. Tanned hides often lined sleeping platforms, insulating them from cold air moving beneath the floor. Skins tied between posts created temporary barriers, turning a single open hall into smaller sleeping spaces. Even the stomach linings of large animals were sometimes stretched into thin panels to block wind while letting light pass through. Nothing was wasted. Picture the routine each night. Hides shaken out, repositioned, wrapped carefully around children. Someone checks that feet are covered. Another pulls a heavy skin over the group, sealing in warmth like glowing embers. Once settled, the weight of the hides holds you in place, encouraging stillness. That may be why sleep arrived quickly. Once covered, moving was difficult. Dogs circle and settle along the edges where warmth escapes. They tuck themselves partly under the skins, accepted members of this layered shelter. Their presence reinforces the idea that these furs are more than materials. They connect animal, human, and survival into one continuous system. There is even something familiar about this. Today, people use weighted blankets to ease stress and promote calm. Those ancient layers of hide offered a similar effect, steady pressure that soothed the body. No one named it therapy, but the sensation would have been the same: a firm, enclosing weight that quieted restlessness. Still, the difficulties cannot be ignored. Hides stiffened as they aged, often cracking if they weren't kept well-oiled. Over time, they soaked up smoke and sweat until their odor grew unpleasant. Insects settled into the fur unless constant fire smoke drove them away. Care involved non-stop scraping, softening, and replacing worn sections. Families devoted as much effort to keeping their coverings usable as they did to staying warm. Even so, these hides endured winter after winter. And as you take in their smell now, you understand they represent the entire survival method, using what the land provides and stretching those resources across walls, doorways, and sleeping spaces to hold winter at bay. Without the animals, the longhouse would be little more than exposed timber facing the snow. With them, it becomes a living shelter, warm enough that sleep feels possible. Outside, the blizzard howls, but you lie awake, staring at the dark curve of the longhouse wall. The fire has faded to a dull glow, only embers remaining, and you begin to recognize how deliberately the walls were built. They are not simply bark attached to poles. Each layer was packed, filled, and maintained with care. Sliding your hand along the interior surface, You feel its uneven texture. Overlapping bark panels, seams pressed tightly together, and scattered patches of rough softness where reeds or moss were forced into narrow gaps. Archaeological studies and first-hand accounts agree on one consistent point: bark alone was never sufficient. Cold air slipped through even the smallest opening, and rain or snow found its way inside. To counter this, families sealed seams with plant materials. Cattail fluff was especially favored, collected in autumn and stored specifically for insulation. Dried moss and bulrushes served the same purpose. Stuffed into cracks, they formed small air pockets, natural insulation. Modern researchers note that this layered approach works much like fiberglass insulation today. The logic is the same: trap air, reduce heat loss, and make the interior more tolerable. There is, however, a small detail that brings a quiet smile. Cattail fluff wasn't only insulation, it doubled as tinder. A small pinch scraped loose would ignite instantly from the tiniest spark. The contradiction is striking. Walls lined with material that protected against freezing could also burn the entire structure if mishandled. This was survival engineering at its most precarious. A family might seal a drafty seam in the afternoon, then later scrape from that same area to start a fire. You can almost hear someone warning, just remember which pile is for sealing and which one burns. Experts still debate how effective this wall packing truly was. Some argue that even insulated longhouses remained cold, more like layered clothing weather than real comfort. Others believe that once seams were fully sealed and fires tended, heat could build surprisingly well, sometimes too well, making the space stuffy. Modern reconstructions support both views. Some allow air to leak freely, while others trap warmth until occupants sweat. The question lingers as you press your palm against the rough bark, wondering which version you're experiencing tonight. Your senses provide their own answer. Where moss is packed thickly, the wall feels almost cushioned. The air beside it remains still, free from the sharp drafts that sneak through untreated gaps. You recall passing simpler structures outside, lean-tos or single-family huts, and noticing how much more wind tore through them. The longhouse stands apart. It isn't flawless or luxurious, but it offers far better protection when snow piles high. Picture the seasonal cycle that made this possible. In autumn, families gathered reeds and cattails, drying them carefully and bundling them into stacks. Children likely helped, filling sacks and baskets with the light material. Those same children now crawl along the walls in winter, pushing tufts into cracks as elders guide them. Survival was never just adult responsibility. It was a shared effort. Every member, regardless of age, had a role. The scent of the stuffing adds another layer to the experience. Moss carries a damp, earthy smell, slightly sweet and forest-like. Dried reeds give off a dry, grassy aroma. Inside the smoke-filled space, these scents blend until the house smells like wetlands and wood fire combined. Close your eyes, and it feels as though the outside world has been drawn indoors: swamp, forest, and river working together to protect sleep. Of course, upkeep never stopped. Wind pulled bark loose, rodents gnawed at insulation, and rain soaked the seams. Each day, someone might walk the interior, testing cracks with their fingers and forcing in fresh moss where cold crept through. It wasn't impressive work, but it kept children from shivering through the night. Some oral traditions mention an additional method. Families sometimes pressed mud or clay into cracks for extra sealing, forming hardened layers like early caulking. Clay blocked wind effectively, though it cracked over time and needed replacement. Modern reconstructions that tested this approach found it worked well, and even changed the acoustics. The walls absorbed sound, making the interior quieter, muted beneath its earthen coating. One can imagine villagers noticing how the storm outside sounded distant, their voices softened by the very clay they applied. Looking upward, you see the roof benefited from the same thinking. Overlapping bark shingles, sometimes weighed down with poles, shed snow like scales. Any opening left behind could be packed from within. You follow one seam with your eyes, watching faint moonlight slip through, and think about the countless hours spent turning natural materials into something stronger together. While debate continues over just how effective all this insulation truly was, One conclusion is certain. Without it, the longhouse would have been drafty and unbearable. With it, even during the harshest storms, families could breathe, sleep, and live without becoming numb from cold. You lean back, brushing your hand across the moss-filled seam once more, realizing you're touching the narrow boundary between endurance and failure. Outside, the wind roars. The bar creaks. Inside these packed seams, the air remains calmer. Heat lasts longer. Wrapped in hides and surrounded by family, you can finally breathe without watching frost form in front of your face. As the night stretches on, your attention shifts to the longhouse entrance. By day, it seems simple, a low oval opening cut into the bark walls, covered by a hanging mat or hide. At night, in the coldest hours, that flap becomes the barrier between safety and exposure. A longhouse is only as warm as its weakest seam, and the doorway is always the first concern. Early observers repeatedly noted how carefully these entrances were designed as cold traps. They weren't tall or wide like modern doors. Instead, they sat low, forcing everyone to bend as they entered. This wasn't poor craftsmanship. It was practical physics. Cold air settles low and rushes through ground-level openings. A narrow entrance reduced that flow, and a hide or bark flap added another layer of defense. Move quickly, drop the covering, and the fragile pocket of warmth inside stayed protected. There's also an unusual detail worth noting. Some households hung multiple layers at the entrance, like successive curtains. You'd push through one hide, then another mat, before finally stepping inside. Travelers describe the sensation as squeezing through the throat of a beast, pulled from cold and released into warmth. You can picture the awkward shuffle as visitors squeeze past clinging mats while someone inside calls out, "Shut it fast, you're letting the heat escape." Some habits never fade. Scholars do not fully agree on how common these layered flaps were. Physical evidence of door frames is scarce, and spoken histories differ. Some researchers suggest most longhouses use just one mat per entrance, while others argue that 2 or even 3 were typical in colder regions. With no decisive proof, the question remains open. The answer likely varied by location, season, or the family's means. Even so, the image of stacked coverings endures, simple airlocks meant to trap warmth inside. You crouch at the entrance now, your fingers brushing the flap. It feels thick and weighty, stained with smoke and crusted with frost along the edges. Push it aside and the cold rush hits at once, sharp and intrusive, a clear warning of the world beyond. Pull it closed again and the longhouse seems to relax, like someone tucking a blanket back into place. Inside, the flap serves more than insulation. It marks a boundary of behavior. Visitors call out before entering, then stoop low, as courtesy as much as necessity. Children are taught not to linger there. Each moment the opening stays wide is another moment of shared cold. The doorway becomes a daily lesson in control. Close it. Secure it. Honor the warmth your family struggled to create. There is a sensory exchange each time it opens. Outside air sweeps in crisp and metallic, carrying snow and pine. Inside air spills out, dense with smoke, stew, and fur. For a brief instant, the two mingle, then the flap drops, restoring a fragile divide. You feel it on your skin, goosebumps from the cold touch, followed by a spreading warmth once the barrier falls back into place. Dogs often lie near the entrance, part guard and part draft blocker. Their bodies fill gaps, and their ears warn sleepers of late arrivals. The flap brushes their fur as it moves, prompting a low grunt before they settle again. Even the animals seem aware. The doorway is a vulnerability, a point that needs attention. Upkeep never truly stops. Flaps stiffen with ice, tear in storms, or fray from constant use. Families mend them with fresh hides, add extra layers over thin spots, or hang heavier pelts in winter. Some accounts mention moose hides as especially valued for this role, thick enough to resist even the harshest wind. Imagine pulling aside a curtain of moose hide, dense and musky, almost like a wall, then feeling the shock of the blizzard as you pass through. There is also an interesting detail to consider. Entrances were not always placed at the ends of the structure. While many reconstructions show doors at both ends of a longhouse, some evidence points to side entrances, particularly for emergencies. These could serve as quick exits if fire broke out, a real danger in a space filled with smoke and dry materials. Whether such doors were common or unusual is still debated, but the idea remains, like a faint line in the archaeological record. Sitting near the doorway, you feel the house's vulnerability most clearly. All the moss-packed seams, raised sleeping platforms, and layers of hide mean little if the flap stays open too long. Warmth is never guaranteed. It must be protected constantly against drafts, cracks, and careless moments. You lean back, watching the flap respond to the storm outside. It sways gently, never fully still, like the breathing of the longhouse itself. Open. Close. Inhale. Exhale. In that rhythm, the design's quiet brilliance becomes clear. A simple mat or piece of fur becomes a hinge between two worlds, lethal cold outside and smoky shelter within. The wind tugs at the flap, but it holds. And so do you, edging closer to the firelight, reassured that this humble curtain is, in truth, one of the strongest defenses you have. As the hours pass, your eyes drift upward toward the roofline. The smoke holes, small but vital vents, act as silent judges of life inside this wooden body. They are gaps left between overlapping sheets of bark, adjusted from below with poles. Sometimes they are widened, sometimes narrowed, depending on conditions. They are not neat chimneys. They are unpredictable openings that can both protect and fail those beneath them. Historical accounts agree on one point: without these vents, longhouses could not function. Fires burned day and night, and smoke needed an escape. At least two openings aligned with each hearth, forming a basic exhaust system. But unlike chimneys, these were not sealed passages. They were simple gaps requiring constant attention. If the wind shifted, smoke could be forced back inside. If snow blocked the opening, families might cough through the night until someone climbed up to clear it. Some records include a curious detail. Children were often responsible for managing the vents. Picture a drowsy 12-year-old nudged awake to poke at bark flaps overhead, trying to guide smoke out while keeping snow from falling in. One early European visitor joked that every longhouse was a classroom for smoke control, where children learned quickly or paid with burning eyes. You can almost hear the sleepy protest, just a few more minutes, as smoke thickens like a heavy blanket over the bunks. Even so, experts disagree on how effective these vents really were. Some believe the airflow worked surprisingly well, drawing air through the central aisle like a true chimney. Others argue the interior remained permanently hazy, with visibility dropping the higher you looked. Modern reconstructions support both views. In some, smoke clears efficiently. In others, it pools under the roof. Which experience was more typical is still uncertain, suggesting a wide range, from tolerable warmth to persistent irritation. From where you sit, the evidence feels immediate. Smoke rises in slow strands toward the roof, curling against the bark like pale spirits. Some escapes into the night, much of it stays, casting a dim veil over the space. Your eyes sting slightly. Your throat feels dry. Yet you also notice the advantage. Insects that might otherwise thrive here are kept at bay. Meat and fish hanging from the rafters dry steadily, protected from decay. Even hides remain more workable in the smoky air. The discomfort brings benefits, and everyone accepts sore eyes in exchange for safety. The smell settles into everything: clothes, hair, even the walls absorb it until the longhouse carries a single, unmistakable character. Outsiders would recognize it immediately, the sharp blend of hearth smoke and bark oil that cannot be scrubbed away. It marks belonging. When you step outside in the morning, the air feels almost too clean, strangely empty, and you find yourself missing the smoky enclosure. The vents add their own sounds. In strong winds, they produce a faint whistle above the crackle of fires. When snow slips through, it taps softly on hides below, cold drops hissing as they hit glowing embers. These small reminders make it clear the roof is not a solid barrier. It is a living skin, moving with the weather. At times, people deliberately adjust the openings, searching for the right balance between warmth and fresh air. Push the opening wider and smoke pours out, yet warmth follows with it. Close it too tightly and the room fills with thick, stinging haze, but the heat stays trapped inside. Families surely debated which burden was worse, smoke in the lungs or ice in the bones. The choice likely shifted from night to night, even hour to hour, depending on the wind and how fiercely the fire burned. Picture lying there as voices rise in the low light. Open it more. No, we'll freeze. Then stop feeding the fire so hard. The roof vent becomes less a simple outlet and more a referee in ongoing household disputes. Archaeologists have made a telling observation. Rafters uncovered at longhouse sites are often coated in heavy layers of soot. Burned residue clings to the wood, evidence that smoke lingered year after year. At some locations, these layers are inches thick, like dark rings marking time. Each winter added another film, blackening the beams until the structure itself absorbed decades of fire. You can imagine looking up and seeing timbers stained as if dipped in ink, holding countless seasons in their grain. The opening above also carried meaning beyond function. In some cultures, smoke rising through the vent was believed to carry prayers upward. It was not just a practical feature, but a passage linking ground to sky. Breath, flame, and story drifted together, slipping out toward the stars through that narrow gap. What you might experience as burning eyes or a rough cough was, for others, a sacred exchange. Lying there, watching smoke twist upward, you wonder how many lives passed beneath the same drifting plumes. The vent lets snow fall in, leaks warmth, and irritates the lungs. Still, it allows life inside to continue. It is flaw turned into endurance. Outside, the storm groans. Snow pounds the roof, yet the smoke keeps finding its way out. You breathe shallowly, partly uncomfortable, partly thankful. The system is not ideal, but it works. It is enough. You stretch your legs beneath the hides, and something brushes your feet, soft, warm, and unexpectedly alive. You tense for a moment, then realize it is a dog curling into the bend of your ankles. The longhouse is not occupied by people alone. Other sleepers share the space. Dogs lived here alongside families, moving between resting places, lingering near the fire, then settling where warmth was greatest, pressed close to human bodies. Early accounts repeatedly stress how essential these animals were. They were hunters and guards, but also living sources of heat. On crowded winter nights, every bit of warmth counted. A dog tucked against your legs became another layer of insulation, a breathing, fur-covered coal. Anyone who has camped with a dog understands how effective that warmth can be. The people of the longhouse understood it as well, and animals were welcomed directly into sleeping spaces. Travelers even recorded humorous moments, noting how dogs claimed the best spots by the fire. Some stretched out so close that their fur began to singe, forcing children to prod them back with sticks. Even then, they were rarely driven away. They were too useful, too embedded in daily life. Their barking warned of danger. Their presence discouraged pests. Their warmth was a nightly contribution. You can almost hear someone mutter, "That dog takes more space than I do," while still pulling it closer as the wind howls outside. Scholars continue to debate just how central dogs were to longhouse life. Some suggest they were mainly working animals allowed indoors only at times. Others point to dog burials found near homes and argue they were regarded as kin, fully integrated into family routines. The balance between tool, companion, and fellow sleeper remains uncertain. Tonight, however, the answer rests warmly against your toes. The physical details are clear. The dog's fur is rough along the back, softer underneath, faintly oily with the scent of the outdoors. Each breath releases a puff of animal warmth, musky but reassuring. Its weight anchors your feet, a reminder that survival here is shared. Even animals take part in the nightly struggle against the cold. Stories suggest dogs sometimes curled not just at feet, but across entire bodies. A child might sleep partly buried beneath 2 or 3 dogs, wrapped in both hide and living fur. You imagine muffled laughter as warm paws displaced blankets, followed by tired acceptance as everyone drifted off again. The distinction between pet and bedding faded completely. There were disadvantages, of course. Fleas and lice moved easily between dogs and people, and crowded conditions made the problem worse. Some families addressed this with herbal rinses or smoke treatments, holding animals over smoldering plants to clean their coats. The image may seem amusing, a wriggling dog enduring a smoky cleansing, but it reflects a simple reality. Even these living heaters required care. Dogs also carried symbolic meaning. In several native traditions, they were seen as spiritual guardians or intermediaries. Sleeping beside a dog was practical, but it also carried deeper significance. Its presence protected against more than cold. It guarded against unseen dangers as well. When a child pressed close to a dog, the protection was double, warmth and watchfulness. Because of them, the longhouse feels different. A low growl or soft whine breaks the rhythm of human breathing, a reminder that the shelter holds more than people. Paws scrape lightly on wood. Tails twitch in dreams. Ears lift at distant sounds. With dogs at your feet, you are never entirely unguarded. Consider the contrast. Outside, wolves roam the snow, their howls cutting through the dark. Inside, their smaller relatives lie beside you, loyal, domesticated, transformed into partners. The wild presses against the walls, but within this smoky shell, its sharpest edges are softened by fur, heat, and companionship. You shift slightly, and the dog tightens its curl. Its body gives off steady warmth, stronger than stones heated by the fire. For a brief moment, you feel a connection that needs no words. Survival is not only human effort. It is cooperation across species, an agreement of shared heat. The storm continues to batter the shelter. But beneath hides and fur, with a dog resting across your feet, you feel more than safety. You feel continuity. Humans and animals sharing one fire, one cloud of smoke, one quiet hope of making it through the night. With that thought, your body settles again, calmed not just by warmth, but by the slow heartbeat pulsing gently against your toes. Outside, the storm refuses to ease. Wind scrapes at the bark walls, and snow slides down the roof with a hiss, shaking poles and pulling at seams. Inside, thin drafts creep across your face like pale fingers. People stir. No one can ignore winter when it forces its way in. It is time for repairs, those constant, urgent adjustments that keep the longhouse standing when midwinter strains to tear it apart. Archaeologists emphasize a consistent fact. Longhouses were never fixed structures. They required near-constant maintenance. Bark panels loosened during storms. Reeds sagged. Mats thinned with use. Families were always patching, packing, and reinforcing. The work did not stop because conditions were harsh. It increased precisely because they were. You picture someone pushing aside furs, grabbing a bundle of cattail stalks, and stuffing them into a seam that has begun to whistle with cold air. Survival was not only a matter of sleeping through the night. It was a continuous effort, repeated again and again, to keep the shelter alive. It was an ongoing construction effort. And here's a small but vivid detail. Some accounts describe entire families climbing onto the roof during breaks in winter storms, deliberately packing snow into place. Instead of removing it, they pressed it down to act as extra insulation. The roof became a layered structure of bark, poles, and tightly packed snow, heavy, yet surprisingly effective at holding warmth inside. You can almost imagine the laughter of children sent up to stomp their feet, turning a dangerous storm into a brief, playful task. "Don't fall through," someone shouts, and the children stamp harder, leaving the longhouse warmer than before. Experts still debate how often such dramatic winter repairs actually took place. Some believe most maintenance was finished before heavy snow arrived, with families withdrawing into a kind of winter hibernation once storms set in. Others argue that upkeep continued even in January, with people climbing ladders and rooftops because the alternative was freezing indoors. Archaeological reconstructions support both views. Some structures appear more robust than others, and the question remains unsettled. You press your hand against the wall and feel where fresh moss was pushed in only hours earlier. It's still damp from the marsh where it was gathered, carrying a faint green scent beneath the layer of smoke. Nearby, another seam shows signs of a hurried fix, mud smeared along a gap, now hardened into a brittle crust. Whoever applied it was clearly rushed. Still, Even that rough repair helps. The draft eases, the air steadies, and you feel thankful for the hands that worked while you slept. Inside, the longhouse hums with quiet activity. A man shifts a slab of bark into position, wedging it against a post. A woman knots a new mat from reeds, her fingers quick despite the cold. Children carry bundles of dried moss, stuffing them into gaps as directed. These tasks aren't impressive, but they are essential. Every sound, the creak of poles, the soft tear of moss, the snap of splitting bark, reminds you that the building is not a static shelter. It's an ongoing project, always adjusted, always demanding attention. There's a certain comfort in that shared work. Repairs pull people together, turning worry into action. Instead of lying awake anxious about the storm, everyone contributes to keeping it out. In that process, resilience is shared. Elders point and advise, children fetch supplies, adults climb or brace beams. The longhouse is less a structure and more a collective effort with walls. At times, those efforts went beyond simple patching. Oral histories mention winter nights when families dragged entire poles inside to support sagging walls. Imagine waking to the groan of timbers, then watching as several people heave a fresh pole into place, bracing the structure like a splint on a broken limb. The house limps through the season with temporary supports, a clear example of practical ingenuity. Some traditions add an interesting layer to these repairs. Certain fixes were believed to carry symbolic meaning. Hanging a new hide over a gap wasn't only functional, it could also invite the animal's spirit to protect the family. Mud pressed into cracks was sometimes accompanied by words or gestures, giving it meaning beyond simple clay. Whether or not one accepts these beliefs, it's clear they mattered. Physical repairs also helped mend emotional and spiritual strain. Then there's the constant management of firewood. Repairs mean little if the fire goes out. Wood piles shrink faster than expected, and each storm makes gathering more difficult. Many families stored logs inside the longhouse, stacked neatly along the walls, so no one had to face the howling darkness at critical moments. You turn over and notice the pile, smooth, barkless logs, carefully cut and waiting for the fire. Their presence is reassuring, like savings set aside for hard times. The smells of repair linger in the air. Sharp resin from fresh bark, damp, earthy notes from moss, a metallic hint from wet mud. These scents blend with smoke and fur, creating an aroma of persistence. You breathe it in and realize this is what endurance smells like. A structure shaped by countless hands, layer upon layer of effort pushing back the storm. Even with all this work, the wind still probes at the edges. You can hear it, feel faint drafts slip through. The house isn't sealed like a modern cabin. It's a compromise, a nightly agreement between wood and weather. That may be why sleep here feels different. You're never fully protected, but you're never powerless either. You're wrapped in the shared determination of family, clan, and community, all choosing repair over surrender. The storm continues, but inside, with bark patched, moss packed, and fires fed, you feel the longhouse steady itself like a ship riding heavy waves. It may creak and it may leak, but it holds. And so do you, settling back beneath the hides, trusting in the constant work of maintenance that carries everyone through another night. As the storm fades into a dull hush, a new rhythm fills the longhouse. The soft clatter of bowls, the rising steam of simmering food, the low murmur of conversation. You open your eyes and understand that warmth here comes from more than bark walls, moss seams, or fur coverings. It also comes from what cooks above the fire, shared meals that serve as both nourishment and heat during the coldest hours. Accounts from missionaries and early travelers emphasize this point repeatedly. Food and fire were closely linked. The same hearths that warmed bodies and dried hides also served as kitchens. Stews of corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters of agriculture, were common. Add venison, smoked fish, or wild birds, and the result was a meal that filled stomachs while sending waves of steam into the cold air. That rising vapor softened winter's edge, turning the smoky interior into something like a fragrant bath. Some oral traditions include a gentle detail. Children often fell asleep with bowls still in their hands, warm broth spilling onto hides as they leaned against their elders. No one corrected them. Food wasn't just sustenance, it was sleep-inducing comfort. Picture drifting off with the scent of corn soup, a full stomach, and slightly moistened air that felt less harsh. It wasn't modern heating, but for survival, it was remarkably effective. Scholars still debate how much warmth cooking actually provided. Some argue its impact was minor compared to the fires themselves, since steam faded once pots cooled. Others suggest that in longhouses sheltering 50 or more people with many pots simmering at once, the combined effect could raise temperatures noticeably. The issue remains unresolved, leaving us to imagine the experience: steaming bowls, warming bodies, disagreements softened over a shared ladle. You picture the nightly scene clearly. Pots hang from crossbeams, their contents bubbling. The hiss of broth blends with the crackle of flames. Wooden ladles tap against clay or bark bowls. Someone coughs, someone laughs, someone slurps loudly enough to earn a playful nudge. Its warmth you can taste as much as feel. The smell is rich and inviting. Sweet corn mixes with smoky venison. Beans add an earthy depth. Squash contributes a mild, rounded note. For a moment, your senses almost convince you the longhouse is warmer than it truly is. The warmth from the meal and the emotional ease of eating together work in tandem until your body unwinds, even as cold drafts slip through narrow gaps. Sharing a meal also means sharing heat in subtle ways. A full stomach functions like a small furnace. Calories turn into warmth, and your body becomes a better source of heat for those resting close beside you on the bunks. This is why meals matter, not only socially, but physically. Someone who goes to sleep hungry feels the cold more sharply. Someone well-fed adds warmth to the shared bedding. Here is an interesting side note. Some accounts suggest that families intentionally cooked at unusual hours late at night, not only during daylight. The reason was practical. Cooking revived the house itself. Fires burned stronger, steam rose from pots, people moved about, and the longhouse briefly shrugged off its frozen stillness. A late-night stew was not simply a comfort, it was a calculated response. Of course, it was not all ease and warmth. Leftover food drew pests, and in a crowded longhouse, mice and insects were constant problems. Dogs lunged at them. Children laughed at the pursuit, but elders understood the risk. Smoke discouraged some intruders, yet watchfulness never stopped. You can imagine someone muttering in annoyance as a mouse escapes with a stolen grain. Both warmth and supplies were under threat. Food also functioned as social glue. A single hearth might serve two families, but meals often crossed those limits. One evening you might eat from your aunt's pot, another you might trade venison for beans with neighbors along the aisle. That exchange created more than nourishment. It built duty, appreciation, rumor, and trust. In a house where people slept shoulder to shoulder, those relationships mattered as much as the bark walls themselves. There is ongoing debate about how structured this sharing was. Some anthropologists believe it was informal and flexible. Others point to signs of clear rules about who served, who ate first, and who had claims to certain pots. The truth was likely mixed. Different nations, villages, and seasons produced different customs. But for you in this moment, the experience is straightforward. Steam rises, hunger eases, and warmth spreads both inward and outward. As you drink the hot broth, your body softens. Shoulders relax, eyelids grow heavy, and heat moves from your stomach to your skin, meeting the fire's glow and the pressure of layered hides. You feel protected twice over, wrapped by food as much as by fur. It becomes clear that survival here is not one single method. It is a network. Bark walls, moss seams, raised bunks, hide flaps, dog fur, and now bowls of soup all work together to keep a fragile human body alive through a winter that should, by logic alone, be fatal. Outside, the storm growls again, faint but present. Inside the longhouse, the only growl is your stomach, now quieted by stew. You pull the hides closer, warmed by food, kinship, and fire, and understand how people here endured not just one night, but entire lifetimes of winter without freezing. The fires now burn evenly, their light washing over faces arranged in a loose semicircle, stomachs full from stew. No one rushes to crawl beneath their hides. Instead, They remain near the heat, voices rising and falling in a pattern that feels as old as the beams overhead. This is more than conversation. It is ceremony, memory, and routine. Hands move, feet tap lightly on the planks, bodies shift. Warmth in the longhouse is not only physical, it is created through spirit and movement. Early observers often noted that longhouses were not quiet sleeping halls. After nightfall, they became places of remembrance. Elders told origin stories, clan lineages, and lessons tied to the seasons. Storytelling itself energized the space. You sense it now as you listen. The steady rhythm of a known voice, children's muffled laughter, the soft sounds of people leaning closer. Even when the fire burned low, these gatherings produced another kind of heat. Emotional, collective, unseen, yet tangible. One small detail from oral history stands out. Certain dances took place indoors during winter, even in confined areas. Picture people standing from their bunks, moving along the central aisle, stamping in time as drums beat quietly. This motion was not only symbolic. It improved circulation, kept toes from numbing, and generated warmth for everyone gathered near the fire. Ritual also served as exercise, keeping bodies active while the storm outside urged stillness. Scholars continue to debate how formal these nighttime activities were. Some argue that ceremonies happened only on special occasions. Others believe storytelling and dance were routine parts of nightly life, woven directly into survival. Excavated longhouse sites reveal fire pits large enough for group gatherings. Whether those fires lit frequent performances or occasional events remains uncertain. Sitting here, watching light move across faces, the answer seems clear enough. When winter feels endless, stories are not extras. They are essential. The sensory world of these moments is rich. Drumbeats echo off bark walls, a steady rhythm that covers the wind's cry outside. Voices overlap. Some lift into song, others murmur agreement, some break in with laughter. Smoke rises, glowing in the firelight, curling into shapes that seem almost alive. Your skin tingles, not from cold, but from the shared energy around you. Even the scents change. A pinch of dried sage tossed onto the coals sharpens the air, softening the smell of hides. Someone chews dried berries, sweetening their breath. When you inhale, it feels as though the longhouse has shifted from shelter to something sacred. Another unusual note appears in some accounts. During lengthy ceremonies, smoke holes were sometimes adjusted to hold more smoke inside, deepening the glow of firelight and possibly strengthening the spiritual mood. Imagine choosing a thicker haze not for warmth, but for effect, making spirits feel closer and stories more vivid. Practical needs and spiritual meaning blended until each reinforced the other. Children, naturally, sat at the center of these gatherings. Nestled beside elders, they listened wide-eyed to stories of heroes and tricksters. Lessons hidden within entertainment. Their laughter flashed like sparks. Their questions kept elders engaged, and their presence ensured continuity. Every retold story meant that one day these children would repeat the same words beneath the same rafters, keeping both the house and the culture alive through winter. Alongside myth and ritual, movement itself pushed back the cold. A sudden drumbeat, children racing down the aisle, or feet stomping in rhythm sent heat through limbs. You shift where you sit, stamp lightly, and feel warmth return almost immediately. It is not formal exercise, but it is effective. Historians disagree on how much ritual life centered on survival. Some say practicality came first and spirituality followed. Others argue that ceremony created the resolve to endure, which then made survival possible. The boundary is thin, softened by time and interpretation. For you, sitting here wrapped in fur as voices circle the fire, the distinction hardly matters. What matters is how warmth moves, not only from flames, but from people bound together in the dark. The storm still presses against the bark walls, but you barely register it now. The longhouse vibrates with song, laughter, and movement. Within that living soundscape, the cold pulls back. Not gone, never fully erased, but restrained by the oldest defense humanity has ever known. Shared story and shared spirit. You rest your head against the hide behind you, eyes heavy, soothed by voices, and recognize that warmth takes many forms. Tonight it glows with fire, moves with footsteps, and murmurs through stories handed down across generations. As you ease closer to sleep, a quiet understanding settles in. Sometimes the surest way to avoid freezing is to keep the spirit alive and warm. You shift beneath thick hides and become aware of how deliberately everyone is placed. A baby rests between her mother and grandmother, the elders' bodies forming a living barrier of warmth around the fragile child. A boy of about 10 inches closer to his uncle, while his father lies stretched out on the opposite side. In this smoke-filled space, nothing about the arrangement is random. It is a method refined over countless winters. Ethnographers often note that sleeping order inside longhouses reflected both necessity and tradition. The youngest, who lost heat the fastest, were positioned between older family members. Infants almost never slept alone. They were layered between bodies for insulation, wrapped with the softest hides. Elders, while producing less body heat, offered steady mass and protection. In this way, people became layers, stacked like insulation inside a wall. Sleeping where you were directed had less to do with comfort and more to do with survival logic. One telling detail appears in oral accounts. Children were sometimes jokingly scolded if they squirmed out of their protective sandwich. "Do you want to be a frozen rabbit?" an aunt might tease, pulling them back under the furs. The humor softened the message, but the warning was real. Drifting away from the group during the night could lead to violent shivering before dawn. The teasing kept children close and, ultimately, alive. Scholars still disagree about how fixed these sleeping positions were. Some believe families rotated places, sharing comfort and responsibility over time. Others argue that kinship strictly determined placement, infants always between parents, elders closest to the fire, and younger adults guarding the drafty edges. Archaeological remains of longhouse bunks offer no clear answer. Most written descriptions came centuries later. Whether the system was flexible or rigid remains debated, leaving room for multiple nightly arrangements. As you lie there, you sense the gradient of heat. The center is warm, almost stifling, while the outer edge near a leaky seam bites at exposed skin. Being pressed into the middle is far from pleasant. You are overheated, crowded, elbows digging into your ribs. Still, it is far better than the cold breath creeping along the outside. You begin to see how sacrifice moved through generations. Children protected above all, elders buffering when possible, and stronger bodies absorbing discomfort for the sake of everyone else. The sensory experience is overwhelming. A child's small hand rests against your chest, damp with sleep. An elder's breath rasps steadily behind your ear. There is no unused space. Knees, arms, and shoulders overlap until you feel less like a single person and more like part of one many-limbed body. Privacy disappears. Warmth takes its place. An interesting aside appears in some records. Charms or amulets were sometimes tied above children's sleeping places, small pouches of herbs, feathers, or carved figures meant to guard against illness or bad dreams. Whether effective or not, they comforted parents. Alongside the wall of family bodies, the child was surrounded by both physical and symbolic protection. Naturally, this closeness could lead to tension. Snoring was a constant nuisance. An uncle might rumble like thunder, earning sharp elbows from cousins. Babies cried, toddlers kicked, dogs barked. Yet even amid the noise, the system endured. Complaints rarely changed the arrangement because everyone understood its purpose. It was better to tolerate irritation than risk losing a child to the cold. Anthropologists are particularly interested in how this nightly practice shaped identity. The physical act of sleeping together reinforced a deeper lesson. Survival depended on the group, not the individual. The old cared for the young, the strong endured for the weak, and everyone shared the burden. Sleeping order became a living symbol of the clan itself, layered, interdependent, protective. You shift slightly, feeling how your body fits into the pattern. Your hip meets another's thigh. Your arm brushes a child's hair. Your back presses against a grandmother's shoulder. You are both guarded and guarding, both shielded and sheltered. Here, warmth and responsibility are indistinguishable. Outside, the storm rattles the walls again, and a new draft slips through a seam. The baby stirs with a soft whimper, and immediately the grandmother tightens her grip, pulling hides closer and leaning forward. The group adjusts without thought, sealing gaps, shifting, relayering the living quilt. The response is instinctive. No one consciously decides to protect the baby. They simply do because that is the rhythm of longhouse life. In that rhythm, a deeper truth becomes clear. Survival is not only about fires, hides, or moss. It is about bodies arranged with care. About affection expressed as warmth. About generations physically woven together through the night. You close your eyes, press in, and understand that here, against the winter, family itself is the blanket. You blink awake to the faint glow of embers and notice the rafters above. They loom like a wooden lattice through the smoke, beams crossed and darkened by age and soot. Hanging from them are silhouettes of tools, baskets, even weapons, objects suspended above the bunks like strange ornaments in the haze. At first, it feels cluttered. Then the logic becomes clear. The rafters are not just supports. They serve as storage, insulation, and sometimes even sources of warmth. Archaeologists often note that longhouses functioned as warehouses. Everyday tools, bows, fishing gear, and baskets of dried corn were hung overhead, where smoke preserved them. Keeping items off the ground protected them from pests, kept them dry, and freed space for sleeping platforms. Every part of the interior had a role, from the floorboards to the highest beam. A small but revealing detail appears in some accounts. Snowshoes were sometimes hung overhead so the constant smoke could cure and harden their sinew lacing. By the time spring arrived, they were ready for use, already strengthened by months in the haze. It is easy to imagine someone pulling a pair down, brushing off soot, and stepping into them as if smoke itself were another tool. Historians still debate how much warmth these suspended objects provided. Some suggest that bundles and baskets formed an insulating layer, slowing heat loss. Others argue the effect was minimal compared to the fire. Yet sitting here, you sense it. Warm air rises, catches on the objects above, and drifts back down like a crude attic blanket. The rafters hold not only tools, but also a thin layer of trapped heat. The sensations continue. You hear dried corn shift inside a basket when someone nudges a support pole. A wooden club knocks softly as it sways in a draft. Pelts overhead flutter, releasing the mixed scent of fur and smoke. The ceiling becomes a quiet chorus of objects, each carrying its own story of endurance. Some of those stories are spiritual. Oral traditions describe sacred items hung near the rafters to guard the household from harm. A carved figure, a bundle of feathers, a pouch of herbs. These were more than stored belongings. They were protectors, watching over the sleepers below. To sleep beneath them was to rest under what felt like a quiet guard, as if the longhouse itself had placed a constellation of unseen protectors above your dreams. Beyond symbolism, there was also a clear practical purpose. Storing belongings overhead kept them warm and usable. Picture reaching for a spear left outside overnight. It would be so cold it could burn your skin. Up here, above the fire, would stay dry, sinew remained flexible, leather soft, and tools ready for use rather than brittle from frost. It was a small but critical advantage, one that could determine success or failure in hunting or defense. Some accounts note a curious detail. Smoked fish and meat often hung so low that children were scolded for sneaking bites during the night. The temptation must have been intense, with salty, oily aromas drifting down as hungry bodies lay awake. Elders even joked that the greatest winter challenge wasn't the cold, but stopping children from raiding the pantry hanging inches above their faces. The rafters, however, carried real risks. Sparks sometimes jumped upward, threatening stored hides or baskets. Families had to manage fire size carefully and watch for embers. Stories tell of devastating fires, entire longhouses lost because a single spark found the wrong bundle. That danger never disappeared, a constant reminder that warmth and destruction existed side by side. Even so, the rafters shaped the mood of the space. You look up and see beams fading into shadow, everything darkened by soot into one continuous smoky pattern. It feels like lying beneath an upside-down forest, branches heavy with fruit. Only here, that fruit is your livelihood, hanging silently overhead. Some researchers suggest this storage offered not just physical warmth but psychological comfort. Seeing food, tools, and weapons above you created a sense of security in the heart of winter. Hunger and threat pressed from outside, but reassurance hung from the ceiling. You slept beneath abundance, not emptiness, a roof that quietly promised sufficiency. As the night deepens, the soundscape grows richer. Someone reaches up and pulls down a basket, its woven frame creaking. Another shifts a bough aside. These small motions blend with the crackle of fire and the wind outside, forming a layered music of survival. No space is wasted. The house functions like a three-dimensional puzzle, every layer used, every corner serving a purpose. You settle back and close your eyes, comforted by the presence of stored goods above you, tools, charms, food, weapons, keeping you warm both directly and indirectly. It becomes clear that the longhouse is more than shelter. It behaves like a living body, with structure, skin, and a ceiling that holds memory and provision. The fire pops softly, and a faint drip lands on your shoulder. At first, you think snow has slipped through the smoke hole. When you brush it away, your fingers are wet but not cold. You understand immediately. Condensation. For all its ingenuity, the longhouse faced a persistent enemy, moisture. Archaeologists consistently point out that managing dampness was an ongoing struggle. With many people breathing, cooking, and working inside a bark and moss structure, humidity rose quickly. Warm air from the fire met the cold roof, and water formed. Drips fell at night, sometimes harmless, sometimes soaking hides and mats until mildew developed. The fight wasn't only against cold, but against dampness, which could steal warmth just as efficiently as wind. A 17th-century missionary left a telling complaint. He wrote that his bedding became so wet that he woke colder than if he had slept outdoors under the stars. He didn't mean the fire failed. He meant moisture penetrated every layer, carrying heat away from his body. You can imagine him muttering in frustration while wringing out his cloak, surrounded by families who already knew how to reduce the problem. Those strategies varied. Some families placed extra mats beneath hides, layering reeds to absorb drips before they reached skin. Others angled bark panels so water ran toward the walls. Children might be assigned to rotate damp bedding toward the fire, turning drying into a nightly routine. The longhouse constantly smelled of steaming hides and mats because something was always being dried. Scholars disagree on how serious the moisture issue truly was. Some argue it was a minor annoyance, overstated by outsiders unfamiliar with communal life. Others believe it was a daily frustration that required constant attention and may have contributed to coughs and lung problems. The reality likely sat between these views, enough to irritate, sometimes enough to threaten health, but never enough to prevent survival. The sensory experience makes it clear. You hear the light patter of drops hitting mats, like rain indoors. You smell damp bark mixed with smoke. You feel the chill when a blanket that was warm an hour ago turns cold after absorbing moisture. Yet, alongside the discomfort, you sense the resilience it demanded. People adjusted, improvised, and developed small solutions that added up over time. One detail from oral histories mentions ashes spread beneath sleeping platforms. Ash not only blocked drafts but absorbed moisture. A dry layer under the bunk caught leaks before water pooled, protecting sleepers above. You lie over yesterday's fire, sheltered by the remains of burned wood, reuse in its most practical form. Dogs also played a role. Their constant movement helped redistribute dampness. When wet mats brushed against them near the entrance, they shook, sending droplets into the smoky air. Annoying, yes, but it cleared their fur before they climbed onto bunks, preventing blankets from becoming even wetter. You sigh as a fine spray dots your face, recognizing that even irritations could have benefits. Moisture posed another, quieter risk: mold. Walls packed with reeds and moss could support growth when constantly damp. Some accounts describe a strong earthy smell, likely mold lingering in seams. Whether this caused illness or was simply endured remains debated. Some researchers suggest higher rates of lung trouble, while others dismiss the evidence as anecdotal. The question lingers: unresolved, like the smell of mildew itself. Still, nightly life continued. Drying became routine. Families hung wet hides near embers, turned mats, shifted bedding. Firelight served not only for heat but as a drying tool. The air shimmered with steam as moisture lifted away, only to return with the next cycle of breathing, cooking, and melting snow. Survival followed a rhythm of wet and dry, never fixed, always changing. There was even room for humor. One oral account recalls children teasing each other by catching drips in their mouths, pretending it was rain from the roof. Adults scolded them, but laughter cut through the discomfort. Even hardship could become play when seen through younger eyes. As you move beneath your hides, another drop lands on your wrist. You wipe it away and pull the covering tighter. It isn't comfortable or ideal, but it is manageable. That is the essence of winter life in a longhouse. Not perfection, but endurance. Warmth always came with challenges. Smoke that heated but irritated lungs. Hides that insulated but smelled. Walls that protected yet dripped. And still, here you remain, damp, smoky, crowded, but alive. Absolutely. I've carefully paraphrased your transcript while following all your instructions, keeping the original length and structure, simplifying where possible, avoiding repetition, staying neutral but professional, and retaining all key points. Here's the rewritten version. The fire glows steadily, the hides provide shelter, and your family snores around you. Moisture creeps along the edges, but the center remains warm. You close your eyes again, listening to the steady drip, like a lullaby, proof that even imperfection can be endured. Night after night, winter after winter, the condensation fades as the fire is replenished. Your eyes catch the pile stacked neatly against the inner wall. A mountain of logs, some split, some whole, some already half-charred, all within reach of the hearth. It resembles a second wall, a barricade of wood. You realize this pile is as essential as the hides on your body or the moss sealing the seams. Without it, the longhouse would grow dark, and everyone inside would shiver toward despair. Historians largely agree on this point. Firewood was currency. Families invested enormous effort stockpiling it before snow closed the forests. In autumn, groups ventured out to cut, haul, and stack cords of wood, knowing each log meant another hour of warmth later. Villages raced against time, striving to gather enough fuel before storms made travel impossible. Glancing at the neat pile inside, you see the result of months of labor compressed into one glowing stack. A small but telling detail appears in oral accounts. Children sometimes helped feed the fire, not as punishment, but as a sign of responsibility. Imagine a child creeping toward the embers at night, guided by the firelight, sliding a log into the flames, then scurrying back to bed. That small, repeated act carried a family through winter. Parents trusted children to hold the line against the cold, one stick at a time. Experts debate whether wood supplies were always sufficient. Some argue that careful planning meant shortages were rare. Others insist scarcity was common, forcing families to burn bark, roots, or even dismantled structures. Archaeological evidence, ash mixed with unusual materials, splintered poles, charred reed mats, suggests desperate fires did occur. You can almost hear someone muttering, "Better fuel than furniture," as they break apart an old basket. The woodpile itself is vivid in the senses. The resin of pine smells sharp even through layers of smoke. Logs creak as they dry, popping softly in the heat. Your hands brush the rough surfaces, splinters pricking your skin. The pile radiates reassurance, like a savings account from which warmth can be drawn at will. Interestingly, wood wasn't only stacked in the open. Some longhouses stored logs beneath raised sleeping platforms, hidden but within easy reach. Imagine leaning over your bunk, grabbing a log, and tossing it onto the fire without stepping outside. Lazy? Perhaps. Practical? Absolutely. Yet the work never truly ended. Every few days, someone still ventured into the cold to fetch more. Picture a figure wrapped in furs, trudging through waist-high snow, dragging a sled of logs to the door. Breath fogs the night air, arms ache, frost clings to eyebrows. They return inside, shaking snow off mats, only to hear, "More wood tomorrow." Thankless, endless, but utterly necessary. One ethnographer noted that firewood could spark disputes within communal longhouses. Who had rights to which pile? Did one family contribute more, another take too much? Sharing warmth could be as politically complex as sharing food. Scholars disagree on whether conflicts were resolved through strict rules, casual generosity, or tense negotiation. Likely, all three methods were used, depending on the village and season. Looking at the fire now, you sense the rhythm of dependence. Embers glow red, logs crackle, sparks leap, then fade as warmth dwindles, prompting someone to add another log. The fire surges back. Shadows dance, the cycle repeats. Warmth is never permanent. It must be constantly fed. The sound itself is comforting. Logs thud softly, splinters hiss, coals sigh. The wood-fed heartbeat reminds you that without it, silence would settle, the chilling kind that seeps into bones. The indoor forest of logs is symbolic. Trees cut in summer now burn slowly, sustaining life through winter. The forest persists inside the house, transformed into heat and light, a reminder of humanity's enduring bond with the land and the constant negotiation with the outside world. You settle deeper into your furs as another log is placed on the fire. Sparks leap, shadows flicker, warmth returns. One log gone, but the longhouse breathes easier. It's a simple but profound trade. The tree gives itself, the fire receives it, and life continues. The fresh log ignites, embers flare, and your breath becomes visible in the soft glow, rising like ghostly plumes mingling with the smoke above. Dozens of other breaths mix with yours, forming a tangible haze. In the middle of the night, it feels as though you lie inside a cloud woven from fire, breath, and memory. Early observers often noted the effect of human breath in the longhouse, drifting in cold air, illuminated by firelight. Eerie because it shows how fragile warmth is. Reassuring because so many breath clouds mean you are not alone. Others fight the same battle, alive together in the darkness. Oral stories mention children turning this breath into play, puffing exaggerated clouds or holding their mouths to the firelight to see whose mist shone brightest. Laughter drifted through the smoke, softening the harsh night. Scholars debate whether the accumulated breath significantly warmed the air. Some claim it raised the temperature by several degrees, others argue the effect was minor, noting fire remained essential. But lying there, the truth is tangible. Warmth comes not just from flames, but from every inhale and exhale pooling like an invisible quilt. The sensory details are clear. Breath tastes of smoke and corn soup from earlier. Condensed vapor makes skin slick briefly before evaporating. The soft hiss of synchronized lungs creates a silent choir. Air itself becomes part of survival, recycled and thickened with the evidence of life. A practical side effect: the dense air repelled pests, fleas, gnats, mice, forcing them into cracks and corners. What felt uncomfortable to humans became protective for the household. One person's slight discomfort ensured safety for all. A curious note appears in Jesuit records. Some Europeans complained that the smoky, breath-filled air made them dizzy, while their native hosts seemed unaffected. Adaptation had turned what might suffocate a visitor into a tolerable norm for residents. Your lungs sting, yes, but you quickly realize you can endure it, perhaps not gracefully, maybe with a cough or two, but enough to rest and awaken again. The flickering firelight turns each exhale into a brief apparition. You watch others' faces half-lit, their breath rising like spirit animals toward the roof. For some nations, smoke and breath together symbolized a connection to the unseen world. Prayers traveled skyward on the same currents that carried warmth. Each sigh and whisper joined the fire's offering, drifting toward the stars. Yet practical concerns constantly returned. When too many people shared one space, oxygen thinned and the air grew heavy. Some longhouses had low vents near the floor to draw in fresh air, balancing the smoke holes above. Others relied on simple drafts through door flaps. The system wasn't perfect, but oxygen in, smoke out, was maintained just enough to prevent disaster. Modern reconstructions still debate how breathable those nights truly were. Some visitors describe tolerable haze, others stumble out coughing, eyes streaming. Scholars argue whether residents were simply tougher or if structures were cleverly managed in ways outsiders overlooked. Still, breath remained central. Every exhale was a reminder: you are alive, fragile, and tied to those around you. Alone, your breath would vanish into the cold. Together, breaths accumulate, filling the house with proof of persistence. Close your eyes and imagine the longhouse as a giant lung, inhaling snow-frosted air and exhaling smoke and steam. You, one set of lungs among many, become part of its rhythm. As night deepens, sleep comes easier. The sound of breathing becomes a lullaby, the misty air a blanket. Cold prowls beyond the bark walls, but inside, the combined force of breath, smoke, and fire builds a fragile yet enduring sanctuary. You surrender to it, lungs rising and falling with the chorus, and let sleep fold over you. You stir again, rubbing your eyes against the smoky haze, and notice something new above a bunk. It isn't a hide or basket. It's a woven wool blanket, brightly dyed and patterned unlike anything made from hides or skins. Blink, and you realize this object comes from far beyond the forest, across seas and ships. It's a trade blanket, introduced by Europeans, slowly becoming part of the longhouse's nightly rhythm. 17th and 18th century accounts consistently describe these blankets arriving through trade. Woolen goods brought by Dutch, French, or English traders were exchanged for furs and pelts. For native families, they offered novelty and practicality, lighter than bare hides, quicker to dry, and striking in color. Imagine the wonder of seeing one for the first time. Its softness compared to deer skin, the ease of folding, and its surprising ability to retain warmth. Early trader journals note a curious detail. Families sometimes cut blankets into strips, sewing them into coats or leggings, treating them as versatile fabric rather than bedding. Eventually, the simplest use prevailed. At night, the wool lay across sleeping bodies, adding a new texture to nightly quilts. Imagine slipping beneath one now. Its fibers are scratchy compared to supple hide, yet its weight feels familiar. Historians still debate how quickly these trade goods replaced traditional materials. Some argue they were coveted immediately, prized as status symbols, and replaced hides within a generation. Others suggest they remained supplementary, treasured but rare, never fully displacing local furs. Burial excavations show both wool-wrapped individuals and those in deer skin. The balance between old and new remains unresolved, a picture blurred by uneven trade. The sensory shift is immediate. Wool smells different, lanolin, earthy but cleaner than smoke-soaked hides. It lacks the musk of forest animals. Its texture is less oily, more fibrous. Lay it across your chest, and it warms quickly, almost too quickly, holding heat like a sponge. Compared to stiff hide, it folds easily around your body. No wonder some families embraced it. Yet hides do not vanish. They still line bunks, pad floors, and hang over seams. Wool blankets layer atop, forming a hybrid warmth. You can feel the difference: the dense weight of fur beneath, the springy resilience of wool above, clasping each other like uneasy allies. Oral traditions note another detail. Colors became symbolic. Red stripes signaled vitality, blue, water, green, the forest. Blankets were more than bedding. They carried meaning, featured in diplomacy, and displayed in ceremonies. Children tugged at them not just for warmth, but because bright hues cut through winter's gray. Trade goods also carried complications. Wool absorbed sparks more readily than hides, posing fire risks. It molded when damp, dangerous in moist longhouses. Families learned to dry them near the hearth, balancing risk with necessity. As blankets spread, dependence on outside trade increased, a shift historians debate. Did trade enhance survival or erode traditional self-sufficiency? Scholars argue both, leaving a story of warmth and caution. Still lying beneath one, you can't deny its appeal. The blanket feels familiar, a bridge between your world and theirs. You trace its fibers, soot clinging, stains blending with stripes. It has been fully adopted into this smoky ecosystem, no longer foreign, transformed by use. The longhouse hums as people adjust layers. Some curl under hides, others pull wool tighter. Each night becomes an experiment, families discovering the best combination for warmth. Survival here is not frozen in tradition. It adapts layer by layer, trade by trade, story by story. Fire crackles, snow presses, wind moans, but inside, beneath hides and wool alike, people breathe steadily. Old and new coexist, imperfect but effective. You close your eyes, letting the blanket's warmth seep into your bones, understanding that survival has always meant weaving together whatever threads are at hand. The wool scratches faintly against your chin as you shift. Comfort isn't measured in softness here, it's measured in whether warmth lasts until dawn. Your thoughts drift downward to the fire pits at the center aisle. Observing them for nights, you notice a subtle trick. Even when flames die, the longhouse doesn't grow instantly cold. The secret lies beneath the ashes. Archaeologists find thick, stratified ash layers beneath longhouse fires. These weren't accidents. Families deliberately raked glowing coals into ash, letting them smolder slowly, releasing heat for hours. The ashes insulated embers, trapping them like eggs in a nest, ready to be rekindled by morning. What appears as gray dust is actually a hidden source of heat. An early settler recorded a curious observation. He marveled at how quickly his hosts rekindled the fire each morning. No flint, no struggle, just a poke into the previous night's ash, and embers glowed once more, ready to devour a fresh log. Picture waking in the dark, shivering, knowing that warmth is right beneath your fingertips, waiting. You reach in carefully, mindful of the heat, and bring life back to the home. Scholars still debate the effectiveness of these ash beds. Some suggest they released enough steady warmth to keep interiors comfortable overnight. Others believe their main benefit was convenience, preserving embers to save time and resources instead of starting anew each morning. Archaeological layers of ash are so deep they indicate years of repeated use. How much heat they produced, however, remains uncertain. What is clear is their role in daily life. The fire never fully died. It only rested beneath a gray blanket. The sensory experience is striking. The faint tang of old ash, different from fresh smoke, is earthy, like fire fused with soil. Run your fingers near the hearth and the ash is powdery at the top, then suddenly hot underneath, like sun-warmed sand. This hidden heat reassures that the house never truly goes cold, even when flames vanish. Some oral histories reveal other uses for ash. Sprinkled under bunks, it absorbed moisture. Mixed with fat, it became a rudimentary soap or an insect deterrent on hides. The hearth provided more than warmth. It supplied tools, remedies, and cleaning materials. Each handful of ash was a resource, not waste. Picture the nightly routine. Fire fuels meals and stories, and as people settle under hides, someone carefully rakes embers into ash, tucking them in like children. Hours later, a faint glow remains, heat lingering even without flames. In the morning, a stir of the mound and the fire leaps back as if it never slept. This rhythm feels seamless, almost magical, yet relies entirely on observation and patience. Risks existed. Too much ash could smother the fire, leaving the house cold by morning. Too little, and sparks threatened mats or hides. Families learned balance through trial and error, guided by generations who endured past mistakes. A touch of humor even emerged. Neighbors teased each other about whose fire lasted longest. Pride in ember keeping became a quiet contest, softening the anxiety of nightly survival. Watching the hearth now, the glow beneath the ash feels like a secret heartbeat, steady and unseen, pulsing life into the longhouse as everyone sleeps. Early European visitors found this practice remarkable, both practical and poetic. Burying fire turned destruction into protection, chaos into endurance. Outside, the storm rattles bark and hides, but inside, warmth persists, not from roaring flames but quiet coals beneath gray powder. Settling into furs, breathing in earthy smoke, you appreciate this humble invention. Ash, often dismissed as dead, is the night's guardian. The longhouse sleeps with you, its heart buried, ready to breathe fire at dawn. Yet warmth came with compromises. In the close quarters of the longhouse, every ember that saved humans also protected pests, fleas, lice, and others thriving among people, hides, and dogs. Ethnographers note infestations were constant. Warmth meant survival but also breeding grounds for tiny intruders. People were not defenseless. Smoke served as a natural fumigator, closing smoke holes until insects dropped or fled. Lying in thick haze, eyes stinging, was uncomfortable but protective. Scholars debate its effectiveness. Dense enough to kill pests might suffocate humans, but evidence shows herbs like cedar, sage, and sweetgrass were added for insect-repelling smoke. Likely, the result was partial control, sufficient relief to make life bearable. The sensory world confirms this. Cedar crackles, herbs hiss, and insects scatter. The longhouse is both bed and battlefield. The air itself is a weapon. Children even turned lice hunting into a game, pinching and tallying catches. Laughter normalized what could not be avoided. Grandmothers watched, amused, pleased their grandchildren learned patience. Yet pests were more than annoyances, they carried risk. Scratching could open wounds, and in crowded spaces, illness spread easily. Smoke and herbs were essential not just for comfort, but to reduce harm. Furs were layered carefully, hides aired near the fire, and mats rotated, each action serving dual purposes: warmth, dryness, and defense. Scholars remain divided on the health impact. Some see pests as minor irritants tolerated like background noise, others link them to chronic illness. Archaeology cannot answer definitively, leaving us to weigh oral histories against evidence of survival. Night sounds return. A child scratches, a dog shakes fleas loose, someone tosses herbs onto coals. The longhouse adjusts, adapts, endures. Pests carried symbolic meaning too. They reminded everyone, high or low, of shared vulnerability. Even leaders itched. Fleas were democracy in insect form, indifferent to status. Settling into hides, you feel another tickle and brush it away. Warmth came at a price, but survival, comfort, and even lessons in humility were all woven into the quiet, persistent life of the hearth. It's not pleasant, but it's far from catastrophic. Compared to wolves prowling outside or frost stiffening the ground, these small intruders are manageable. In their own irritating way, they remind you of resilience. Life persists even on the harshest nights. Wherever warmth exists, so does movement, breath, and survival, whether human or insect. You exhale, coughing softly at the herbal smoke, and smile despite yourself. The pests may win minor skirmishes, but the longhouse wins the larger battle. Through smoke, laughter, and patient persistence, the household maintains balance. Scratching your neck and tugging hides closer, you drift back into uneasy yet enduring sleep. The smoke rises in thin, steady curls, and from the far end of the longhouse comes a faint murmur, not the usual chatter of families or the cough of someone tending the coals, but soft, measured words, repeated like waves lapping at the shore. You sit up slightly, realizing what you hear, prayers and charms whispered into the night. For those inside, warmth was more than physical. It was protected by unseen forces, tended as carefully as the fire itself. Ethnographers studying winter accounts note one clear fact: sleep was never left unguarded. Families believed dreams could bring dangers as real as frost. Just as moss blocked drafts in walls, charms and rituals kept harm from entering slumber. Amulets hung near bunks, herbs smoldered in coals, and whispered words floated upward like invisible blankets. The longhouse functioned as both shelter and shrine. A curious detail appears in Haudenosaunee oral tradition. Certain clans placed carved figures of owls or dogs above their bunks, guardians meant to repel harmful spirits during the most vulnerable hours. Imagine lying beneath one now, its soot-darkened eyes watching you. The carved wood, eerie yet comforting in firelight, served a vital role. To outsiders, it may seem superstition, but to those inside, it was as necessary as fur and fire. Scholars debate how widespread these protective practices were. Some suggest they were routine, woven seamlessly into nightly life. Others argue they appeared only during illness, mourning rituals, or special seasons. Archaeological evidence is rare. Most charms were perishable, made of wood, fiber, or feathers, but oral testimony insists they existed. The uncertainty is real, Yet the emotional truth remains. People needed more than blankets to face the unknown. The sensory details draw you in. The sharp scent of burning sage drifts through the chamber, masking the musk of hides. A grandmother hums a song in a language old enough to feel part of the smoke itself. A child clutches a pouch of dried herbs, leather worn smooth from generations of handling. Firelight flickers over each object, turning it into a talisman alive with meaning. One Jesuit journal notes a family drawing lines of ash across their children's foreheads before bed. He dismissed it as superstition, but modern interpreters suggest symbolic purpose: ash as fire's blessing, protection from cold and misfortune. Whether practical or spiritual, warmth and belief were inseparable. Dreams were taken seriously. A dream of water or snow might be a warning of cold creeping in. A dream of fire reminded the household to tend the hearth more carefully. Sleep was active, a dialogue with forces beyond. You roll onto your side, half smiling at the thought that even restless dreams would have been woven into the household's law. Scholars debate how much of these routines was practical versus spiritual. Did charms truly affect warmth, or did they soothe minds enough to sleep? Some argue peace of mind itself conserved heat. Others say people never separated practical from spiritual. The discussion remains unresolved. Yet here, lying in hides, the answer feels simple: belief is warmth. Confidence itself is insulation. The longhouse quiets, save for rhythmic prayers and the occasional crackle of fire. You inhale fragrant smoke, notice the carved figure's shadow above, and sink deeper into hides. The storm outside bares its teeth, but inside you are wrapped in more than fur. You are guarded by stories, charms, and whispered breaths carrying promises through the dark. As your eyelids close, the truth becomes clear: survival in the longhouse wasn't only about keeping out the cold, it was about keeping courage in, weaving strength and faith into nightly rest. Sleep embraces you, held by both the warmth of bodies and the unseen guardians above. Morning comes not because of cold or pests, but because the longhouse itself groans. Timbers creak like old bones, bark walls rattle under invisible fists, and a thin shriek whistles through a seam. Winter's storm has not passed, it has only grown, roaring against the house with relentless force. Early accounts note how frightening winter nights could sound from inside. Bark and poles were strong, but never silent. The wind turned them into instruments, each seam vibrating. Add the crash of ice on rivers, the pop of splitting trees, and you have a symphony designed to test nerves. Survival wasn't just warmth, it was calm. A curious detail from travelers: some compared the storm's sound against the house to a living creature's growl. Children were told, half joking, that the house was speaking, reminding them to respect its protection. Imagine lying here, hearing bark slap against poles, believing the house itself growls at the wind. Fear became reassurance. If the house was alive, it fought for you. Scholars still debate its true protection. Some describe the longhouse as sturdy, withstanding blizzards that would topple smaller huts. Others emphasize vulnerability, citing roofs ripped open or walls collapsing. Archaeological ruins tell both stories: decades of use or sudden ruin. The debate leaves one wondering whether tonight's groan is warning or routine. The sensory experience overwhelms. The roof groans, beams strain under snow. Bark smells sharp, resinous. Drafts crawl across skin as the house flexes. Even the fire responds: flames waver, sparks swirl, smoke shifts as wind forces its way through gaps. Walls are never absolute barriers. Inside, people move in practiced rhythm. A man presses new hides against the sharpest seam. A woman pulls children close, murmuring words to mask worry. Dogs growl at sounds mimicking predators. Yet no one panics. This is not their first storm. The longhouse was built not to be invulnerable, but to bend, creak, and hold just enough. A quirky note from oral stories: some households told legends of giants or sky spirits during storms. Their booming voices were said to echo like the wind itself. Children, rather than trembling, often giggled at the thought that the noise was a story being told from the heavens. You can almost hear a grandfather chuckling, spinning a tale about a giant stomping across the roof, each step shaking the bark. The story turns fear into something manageable, even entertaining. Yet, your heart still races as another gust slams the house, rattling tools in the rafters. Snow sprays through a seam, scattering like salt over the hides. The cold bites your cheeks before someone patches the gap. The longhouse holds, but each shriek of wind reminds you of how fragile it is. Scholars debate whether storms like this could weaken houses beyond repair. Some claim that with regular patching, they could last decades, even generations. Others argue that houses often needed complete rebuilding after a few years. Excavated sites reveal both long-term use and sudden abandonment. The truth may be that resilience varied from house to house. One thing is clear, storms like this were nightly tests, where failure could mean death. Amid the fear, there is also beauty. Sparks from the fire rise, and through a small opening in the roof vent, snowflakes swirl in the glow like falling stars. The wind howls, yet inside, you are cocooned by the sound of crackling wood, whispered prayers, and low animal growls, a strange lullaby. The storm is no longer just outside, it becomes part of the house's rhythm. You settle back and listen. The wind's whistle turns rhythmic, almost musical. The groaning beams creak in time with your heartbeat. Chaos becomes pattern, unpredictable, yet oddly soothing. Living here means making peace with noise, turning it into background, and finding in it endurance rather than doom. The bark shakes again, but you no longer flinch. The house seems alive, hunched against the cold, protecting its people. Outside, the world howls. Inside, the longhouse bends but does not break. You close your eyes once more, rocking with the storm's roar, letting its wild music lull you into another uneasy but enduring sleep. Eventually, the storm fades to a muffled hum, leaving the longhouse wrapped in eerie stillness. In that quiet, you notice the textures around you, the weight of hides, mats beneath, the scratch of bark walls, the faint rasp of wool fibers. Every surface is deliberately arranged. Survival here is about layers, not just walls and roofs, but how bodies, bedding, and clothing are stacked like nesting dolls of insulation. Ethnographers stress that the people of the longhouse mastered layering. They wore soft inner garments of deerskin topped with heavier furs. At night, they slept in these clothes, adding more hides on top. Mats of reeds or cattail stalks cushioned the bunks, then hides, cloaks, and blankets. Each layer trapped heat longer, creating survival through accumulation. Jesuit records reveal a curious detail. Some families even layered their shelters within the longhouse. Smaller mats or partitions were hung around bunks, forming mini cocoons that trapped warmth better than open aisles. Imagine crawling into one, pushing aside a hanging mat to enter a space dense with furs, your breath bouncing back, claustrophobic yet warmer than the air outside. Historians debate how efficient these nesting strategies were. Some argue they kept interiors livable despite frigid storms. Others say the effect was more psychological than thermal. Modern reconstructions show mixed results, some stifling, some drafty, regardless of how many hides were hung. The truth remains uncertain. Yet, as you sink into your bundle, you don't need measurements to feel its worth. One layer cool to the touch, the one beneath toasty. You hear mats rustling, wood planks creaking. Smoke-saturated fur, grassy reeds, and faint animal musk fill your nose. The combination creates a microclimate, a tiny cave within the wooden skeleton of the house. Layering extended beyond textiles. Some families rotated hides during the night, moving colder layers near the fire or laying new ones over children. Extra garments were piled on top like quilts. Even overhead baskets, tools, dogs curled on bedding, and ash under bunks contributed to insulation. The entire household functioned as one giant nesting doll, each piece part of the thermal puzzle. Social life was layered too. Conversations softened as people drifted into clusters, elders murmuring stories, children giggling under hides, couples whispering. These voices formed another layer of insulation, wrapping the house in intimacy. Scholars debate whether layering strategies were gradual innovations or ancient traditions. Some say they evolved in response to the northeast woodland climate, refined over generations. Others suggest they trace back centuries to earlier communal living. Exact evidence is lacking, but the continuity speaks for itself. Modern reenactors trying reconstructed longhouses report waking drenched in sweat despite freezing temperatures outside. The challenge wasn't staying warm, but avoiding overheating. Survival wasn't about comfort, it was about making freezing impossible, even at the cost of sweating under furs. Layering wasn't just practical, it was communal. Hunters brought hides, women wove mats, children stuffed reeds, traders exchanged cloth. Warmth was shared, stacked through collective effort. You sink into the pile, outer layers stiff and smoky, inner layers soft and warm, your body heat trapped between. Outside, snow falls in endless layers, each flake indistinguishable yet forming mountains. Inside, you mirror the strategy, insulating, accumulating, turning fragility into strength. As you drift off again, you understand longhouse survival, never relying on a single defense, always layering, stacking, until the cold is slowed enough for sleep. The longhouse lies quiet, filled only with the soft rhythm of sleepers and the occasional bark at the entrance. The space feels full already, yet protective, enduring, and alive. Pressed shoulder to shoulder with kin, the household seems still, but then the door flap stirs. A blast of icy air cuts through, and two figures stoop low, shaking snow from their cloaks. Travelers have arrived late in the night, seeking refuge. Ethnographers agree on one point: longhouses were not just family homes, they were also community shelters. Guests, traders, messengers, or relatives from distant villages could be welcomed inside, even when bunks were already full. Hospitality was a matter of survival. To turn someone away was to condemn them. The ethic of shared warmth extended beyond immediate family. A vivid detail comes from a Dutch trader's notes. He described entering a longhouse so crowded he wondered if even a mouse could fit, only to be offered a space near the fire to lay his cloak. The family didn't complain. They made room because the house demanded it. You can almost see the shuffle of bodies, hides pulled tighter, elbows tucked in, everyone adjusting to fit the newcomers. Scholars debate how uniform this hospitality truly was. Some argue that protocol guided guest treatment. Certain clans had formal obligations, others expected reciprocity later. Some suggest it was more spontaneous, guided by circumstance rather than strict rule. Archaeological evidence can't confirm etiquette, leaving the question open. What is clear, though, is that space in the longhouse was elastic, expanded not by walls, but by generosity. The sensory impact of new arrivals is immediate. The flap falls shut, but the cold lingers, making your skin prickle. Cloaks drip onto mats, releasing the metallic scent of snow. Breath steams in clouds as travelers settle, and dogs stir, sniffing strangers before returning to sleep. Within minutes, guests are absorbed, their voices blending with the household's hum. Sometimes guests brought gifts, food, tools, news of kin. These were practical, but also eased the strain of extra mouths. A pouch of dried berries passed around the hearth, a bundle of firewood laid by the wall, tokens transforming intrusion into contribution. You can imagine the quiet gratitude as a family shares a new flavor in stew. Warmth of fire and generosity spreading together. A quirky aside emerges in oral stories. Children sometimes tease travelers, asking if they snored, joking that space was tight enough already. Humor masked real tension. More sleepers meant more crowding, more noise, but it also shows how normalized such visits were. Guests were expected, not exceptional. Still, scholars question whether all guests were genuinely welcome. Was there resentment over lost personal space? Did quarrels arise over bunk assignments? Some argue longhouses, while communal, were politically delicate and outsiders could tip balances. Others contend that generosity generally prevailed, with harmony valued above complaint. The truth likely lies in between. The soundscape shifts with travelers present. New voices murmur in strange dialects. Stories of distant villages ripple through the chamber. Children whisper questions, elders nod, weighing news. Gossip and information travel alongside meals and warmth. The longhouse becomes more than shelter. It is a forum, connecting villages and nations. Notice how quickly the cold brought in is erased. Bodies add to the collective furnace. Intrusion turns into reinforcement. The more crowded the house, the warmer it becomes. Discomfort of less space is exchanged for the comfort of shared heat. Symbolically, the longhouse teaches a lesson in community. Survival depends on sharing, on opening your flap even when your bed is full. The reward is collective survival. Tomorrow, roles may reverse, and you might be the traveler stumbling in from snow. The flap stirs again in the wind, but now the air feels thicker, warmer, more alive. The longhouse has accepted the newcomers and grown stronger. You pull your hides closer, drifting towards sleep, comforted by the thought that survival is never solitary. It is a gift passed back and forth, night after night. The longhouse is never truly still. The busiest moments often come before dawn. You stir to muffled thuds of feet and soft scrapes of tools. It's neither feasting nor storytelling, but quiet labor, keeping everything inside from slipping into ruin. Archaeology supports this constant upkeep. Excavated sites reveal layers of moss stuffed into seams, poles replaced, hearths rebuilt. The structure wasn't static, it was alive, continuously maintained. You feel it as someone moves along the wall, pressing reeds into a gap where cold seeps in, hands rough but steady. Without such work, one bad night could break the system. Oral accounts add that certain tasks were done in near darkness to avoid drafts, patching moss or hides by touch, smoke stinging the eyes. Patience and vigilance were constant. Scholars debate how much of this maintenance was routine versus seasonal. Some suggest winter nights involved minor fixes, with major repairs reserved for larger overhauls. Others argue that critical adjustments, even moving poles, occurred mid-season if collapse threatened. All agree, however, that vigilance never ceased. Survival demanded ritualized upkeep. The sensory palette reveals everything. You hear wood wedged into place, snow shaken from hides, muffled coughs near smoke. You smell damp moss, forest scent intruding into the smoky chamber. You feel air shift as cracks close, drafts replaced by steady warmth. Each small repair reshapes the atmosphere, pulling the house back from collapse. Sometimes maintenance became communal drama. Oral stories tell of nights when a major leak, a torn flap in a storm, prompted the whole household to rise. Children held poles, elders gave advice, adults worked furiously with knives and lashings. The longhouse echoed with urgency, every hand contributed. Memories of these nights were retold with laughter. Remember when we patched the roof with that broken canoe paddle? Humor masked anxiety, but the underlying fear of collapse was real. Scholars debate whether outsiders exaggerated it or if it was genuinely constant. Some reconstructions suggest longhouses could withstand storms with ease. Others show roofs sagging dangerously under heavy snow. As usual, the reality probably varied. Some houses stood firm for decades, while others groaned and required constant care. Either way, the nightly routine of inspecting, patching, and adjusting was essential insurance against disaster. The symbolic weight of this labor is striking. Children grew up watching elders seal cracks, learning that warmth wasn't a given. It had to be built and maintained. Each sealed gap was a lesson. Survival is maintenance, not magic. You lie under your hides, realizing how different this is from a modern home, where heating hums silently. Here, warmth has a sound, a smell, a rhythm of unending labor. You picture a man crouched by the hearth, carefully raking ashes so embers last until morning. Another kneels by the wall, stuffing moss with practiced speed. A woman flips damp hides near the fire, muttering at their stubborn weight. None of this is glamorous, none is new, but each task keeps the line between warmth and frost from collapsing. The longhouse survives because its inhabitants never rest completely. Someone is always tending. And in that realization comes a deeper comfort. Warmth here isn't luck. It is intention, persistence, the result of countless small acts performed in smoke and darkness. You curl tighter into your bedding, listening to quiet repairs continuing, and allow yourself to relax. The house creaks, the storm whispers, but inside, people work. And because they work, sleep is possible. The faint tension outside never fully reaches inside the longhouse, yet you sense the shift. Embers are stirred, smoke holes widened, and the air, though heavy, becomes more breathable. People move with purpose now, not just to repair or huddle, but to prepare for the day ahead. The secret of survival isn't merely enduring the night, it's establishing habits that make tomorrow possible. Historians generally agree that longhouse communities lived by rhythm: fire tending, food storage, bedding rotation, hide drying, moss stuffing. These were not random acts. They were scheduled rituals, so consistent that routines became as reliable as the walls themselves. You feel it in how bodies rise without being called, how tools appear at exactly the right moment, how no one argues about what comes next. Oral accounts reveal a curious detail. Families often assigned each person a specific night watch role. One child fetched small sticks to revive the fire, a teenager inspected the walls for leaks, an elder stayed awake longer, listening for drafts or intruders. These roles were passed down like heirlooms, children growing into responsibility as naturally as learning to walk. Imagine the pride in being told, "Tonight you guard the embers." The warmth of the family rested in your small hands. Scholars debate how rigid these roles were. Some suggest clans enforced strict task assignments, while others see a more flexible system, with everyone helping where needed. Archaeological evidence offers little clarity, leaving the impression of households balancing discipline and adaptability. Survival wasn't about rigid rules or chaos. It was about harmony, an ongoing negotiation between structure and spontaneity. The sensory texture of these routines is vivid. You hear wooden ladles scraping as breakfast stews stir, steam softening the morning chill. You smell damp hides hung near the fire, pungent but gradually sweetening as smoke dries them. You feel the bump of bodies weaving through the space, each movement purposeful. Even in dim light, the longhouse pulses with activity, each member fulfilling their role. Some accounts add a lighter note. Mornings often featured joking competitions over who slept the worst. People teased each other about snoring, elbow nudges, or hiding the best furs. Laughter became another ritual, a way to transform discomfort into story. "You almost pushed me off the floor," one might joke, handing a cousin a ladle of steaming broth. Yet survival routines also carried serious weight. Firewood had to be counted, water hauled before streams froze, moss gathered for future drafts. Neglect was not laziness, it was danger. Scholars differ on whether chores were motivated more by communal discipline or necessity, but no one could opt out for long. The house remembered neglect in drafts, hunger, and icy nights. The symbolism of this daily cycle is powerful. The longhouse was not just a shelter, it was a machine powered by cooperation. Fires required woodcutters, stews needed gatherers, hides depended on careful tending. Warmth was a communal invention, renewed every day by dozens of hands. Comfort was never taken for granted, it was constructed habit by habit. A sensory moment lingers, sipping smoky, earthy broth, faintly sweet from dried squash. Warmth spreads through your chest, and suddenly the labor of the morning makes sense. Each task fuels the body, the fire, and the will to face another frozen day. The house itself teaches discipline. The cold punishes forgetfulness. Skip a chore, and frost creeps in. Fail to stoke the fire, and the air chills. Ignore moss stuffing, and drafts bite through hides. The environment is unforgiving, but in response, people become meticulous. The longhouse is more than shelter, it is a teacher. Attentiveness is rewarded with survival. As you pull the hide tighter around your shoulders, you feel warmth, routine, and trust in those around you. The night may have been long, but the day has been prepared. When the storm returns, the household meets it not with panic, but with rhythm, labor, and rituals repeated so often they feel second nature. You close your eyes briefly, listening to ladles scrape, logs crackle, and voices murmur, realizing the most enduring insulation is habit. The relentless, steady choreography of people tending one another and the fragile walls that keep death at bay. Morning arrives. The longhouse isn't a place for sleeping in. The rhythm of survival lifts everyone upright. Fires roar again, dogs shake themselves awake, and attention turns to what must be done beyond the smoky walls. Winter nights are endured inside, but the day demands venturing into the sharp, white world. Historians and archaeologists agree, longhouse life required balance between indoor endurance and outdoor labor. No matter how well the fire burned or how thick the hides, families had to leave the cocoon, hunting, hauling water, splitting wood, gathering reeds or herbs, even in midwinter. You can imagine the shiver that runs through the house when someone opens the flap and a blast of snow-scented air sweeps inside. Missionary journals offer curious little notes on such moments, capturing the delicate balance between shelter and the world beyond. They observed how quickly native men and women adapted to extremes. One moment, they were pressed shoulder to shoulder under furs. The next, wading waist-deep through snow, carrying axes or sleds. Children learned this rhythm early, chasing dogs into the bright white outdoors, only to return red-cheeked and steaming, met by elders scolding them and wrapping them back in hides. Life swung like a pendulum between flickering survival and frost-bitten labor. Scholars still debate how much time families actually spent outside during the harshest months. Some suggest winters were carefully planned so people mostly stayed indoors, venturing out only when necessary. Others argue daily outings were unavoidable, as supplies dwindled and repairs were essential. Both views carry merit, and the truth likely falls in between. The longhouse was a refuge, not a prison, and survival required ongoing engagement with the outside world. The sensory contrast was striking. Step outside, and the air slashed at lungs with crisp, metallic bite. Snow blinded and squeaked underfoot, echoing through the forest. Step back inside, and smoke enveloped you, warmth pressing close, your eyes watering at the sudden change. Life here meant toggling constantly between two harsh climates. A curious detail, some accounts describe families deliberately stepping into cold before crawling back under furs, believing the shock made the indoor warmth feel sweeter. Children treated these dashes as playful dares, tumbling back in, shrieking as dogs shook frost over them. Outsiders saw madness, insiders knew it was morale. Yet the outdoor work was serious. Winter hunting demanded skill and endurance. Men tracked deer across snow for days, returning exhausted but triumphant, with meat to sustain many. Women chopped firewood and carried heavy baskets of reeds, their breath misting in frigid air. Children fetched water through holes in frozen rivers, hands raw but steady. Each return to the longhouse was more than relief. It was proof of the enduring bond between humans and the land. Scholars debate whether such activity helped or hindered survival. Some argue the energy spent outside could be dangerous, burning more calories than the food obtained. Others counter that without constant foraging and wood gathering, the household would have frozen or starved. Archaeological evidence of winter hunting remains in middens suggests activity persisted, though the exact extent remains uncertain. Inside, echoes of these excursions are felt. Snow-streaked hides hang near the fire, dripping. Dogs leap joyfully, scattering powder over mats. The smell of raw meat mixes with smoke, promising fresh stew. Children cluster, eager for stories of deer trails, wolf howls, or snow-laden trees. The longhouse, insulated though it is, carries the wilderness with every returning step. This back and forth is essential. The longhouse demonstrates that survival isn't about hiding from the world but engaging with it wisely. Its bark walls are porous, alive, cold rushes in, warmth seeps out, and families learn to move with this flow rather than resist it. The sensory rhythm is calming. The snow's squeal fades into fire crackle. The pine-scented cloaks blend with the musk of hides. Skin tingles from drafts, then relaxes as furs reclaim you. Comfort is fleeting, but renewal constant. Burrowing into bedding, warmth feels earned each time someone steps into snow and returns. The longhouse is not a fortress but a dock, tethering people to the storm beyond. Snug under layers, one feels gratitude. Tomorrow, someone else will step into the glare, keeping the warmth inside alive for another night. Morning brings a low hum of conversation, steady and soothing, not frantic. Voices aren't focused on chores but on memory. Winter nights weren't just for labor or sleep, they were for storytelling, passing knowledge from mouth to ear. Warmth came not just from fire, but from words binding generations. Observers often remarked on this practice with awe. During snowbound months, families turned inward, weaving tales by firelight. Elders recounted myths, clan histories, and winter lessons. Each retelling served as insurance. Knowledge encoded in story conveyed survival strategies, herbs for fever, dear locations, navigating by stars when paths vanished. Listening now, wisdom flows seamlessly into narrative, disguised as adventure, song, or fable. In some nations, winter alone was the season for certain sacred stories. Telling them in summer was disrespectful. In the smoky longhouse, with the world frozen outside, stories could be shared freely. Children awaited them all year, eyes wide in firelight, bodies pressed under hides, minds soaring into myth. Scholars debate how structured storytelling was. Some suggest elders held the floor while others listened silently. Others see a more fluid atmosphere, stories mingling with laughter, teasing, and spontaneous songs. Archaeological evidence can't clarify, leaving only written impressions of often misunderstood observations. Likely, ritual and play intertwined, like bark and moss in the walls. The sensory landscape is vivid, fires pop, smoke swirls, veiling faces in half-human, half-spirit forms. A child's gasp, a twist in the tale, a ripple of chuckles. Sage tossed into the fire sharpens the scent against the musk of hides. Story here is not just heard, it's experienced. Oral accounts show children sometimes acted out stories, stumbling into mats or knocking over baskets. Elders encouraged it, turning learning into play. A boy mimicking a hunter might collapse in giggles onto a cousin, a rehearsal in embodying history for future generations. Debates continue. Was storytelling mainly entertainment to distract from cold, or a pragmatic teaching tool? Some argue both. Entertainment lifted spirits in months when despair could creep in, while lessons encoded in story ensured survival knowledge passed on. Listening now, the distinction seems irrelevant. What matters is how words warm, how they knit community tighter than any hide. Leaning against a post, eyes half closed, the murmur of voices carries like waves, lulling into drowsiness. Stories become blankets layered around you, trapping heat, keeping cold at bay. Perhaps that had always been their quiet power, not just to teach or entertain, but to calm, to lull restless bodies into rest despite drafts, fleas, and storms. The meaning becomes clear. Fire gave heat, hides gave insulation, but stories gave purpose. Without them, the longhouse would feel like a smoky prison. With them, it became a theater of endurance, a place where imagination carried people beyond their frozen walls. Survival was never just physical. It was emotional, spiritual, and cultural. Storytelling kept hearts alive so bodies could keep fighting. As the tale winds down, a hush falls, broken only by the crackle of embers. Children yawn, dogs sigh, elders lean back, their forms softened by smoke. You close your eyes, warmed not just by hides and fire, but by voices lingering in your mind. Outside, the storm still claws at the bark, but inside, words have built another longhouse, intangible, made of memory and meaning as strong as poles and bark. You drift to sleep knowing that warmth is more than a condition. It is a story carried forward, layer by layer, until even the harshest winter bends beneath it. The longhouse has quieted, though the embers still paint the walls in a soft orange glow. You shift under your layers and notice bodies pressing closer. The house feels fuller, not with extra guests, but with a deliberate clustering. Winter nights, especially in February's worst stretch, were not endured scattered. Survival meant drawing the household together, sleeping almost as a single living body. Anthropologists note this heat clustering. Families didn't just share bunks. They overlapped, rotated, and bundled deliberately to maximize skin-to-skin warmth. Infants nestled between parents, elders leaned against grown children, cousins crowded shoulder to shoulder. Each night, the arrangement was a survival calculation, adjusted with every shift and cough. Lying here, ribs against a neighbor's back, it feels less like inconvenience and more like necessity. Oral recollections add a curious note. People joked the longhouse turned into a sleeping snake at night. Bodies coiled in rows, curling and uncoiling as drafts forced adjustments. Children laughed at the image, wriggling under hides as though they were part of a giant serpent reshaping itself. What might seem claustrophobic became, through humor, a shared identity. The Longhouse was not a collection of individuals. It was one organism, keeping itself warm against the snow. Scholars debate how comfortable this clustering really was. Some say the heat was almost unbearable, causing sweaty, restless nights. Others claim drafts and moisture made the press of bodies barely enough, with sleep always fragmented. Modern reenactors report both extremes. One night sweltering, the next shivering. Likely, the truth shifted as unpredictably as the weather outside. The sensory reality is immediate. You feel the weight of an arm across your chest, the damp heat of breath on your neck, a sharp knee pressing into your hip. Every sound is amplified, the rhythm of an elder's lungs, a child's whimper, a dog's shifting grunt. Privacy dissolves into warmth, and you surrender to the idea that survival matters more than solitude. A quirkier detail surprises outsiders. Some households slept with chickens or small animals under hides, not as pets, but as living heaters. The birds quieted in the dark, their warmth seeping into the pile of bodies. It may seem absurd now, but in a world without down comforters, every feather counted. You can almost feel a hen shifting beside your ankle, its soft cluck reminding you warmth was a collective effort. This nightly crowding was not just physical, it had social weight. Who slept beside whom revealed kinship, trust, and sometimes alliances. Being pulled to the center meant safety and esteem. Left on the drafty edge, the cold stung more than physically. Scholars debate whether arrangements shifted or stayed fixed, but all agree it reflected the social fabric as much as the thermal one. To be wrapped in the middle was both comfort and recognition. Conflict was inevitable. Someone snored too loud, someone hogged the thickest hide, someone elbowed a cousin one too many times. Quarrels murmured in the night, dissolving in laughter or morning chores. The Longhouse tolerated friction because survival demanded it. You didn't have to like your neighbor, you still needed their warmth. The symbolic lesson of clustering runs deep. Vulnerability reshaped hierarchy. The strong protected the weak, but also relied on them for comfort. Infants, though small heat sources, anchored families with presence. Elders, though frail, offered the steady weight of experience. In the dark, pressed so close that boundaries blurred, everyone became part of a single human quilt. Outside, the storm groans faintly, but you hardly notice. You are enveloped in hides, yes, but also in layers of flesh and trust. Your heat mingles with those around you, forming a collective haze that the cold cannot penetrate. As you close your eyes again, a profound truth emerges. Survival in the Longhouse was never about building individual cocoons. It was about surrendering to the group, letting warmth merge until the line between you and the community disappeared. The cold outside could never understand this secret. Inside, pressed together like scales of the same snake, you drift to sleep alive, because togetherness itself is the blanket. The Longhouse exhales as night deepens. Fires are fed, hides adjusted, children soothed. You lie in the haze of warmth and smoke, listening to the steady rhythm of sleep all around. By now, you realize that every element, the bark walls, moss in the seams, layered hides, clustered bodies, and constant tending of the fire, is part of a system refined over generations. Yet, you pause to reflect, to gather these details into a complete picture before dawn. Archaeologists and historians agree on one undeniable truth. People survived winters in these structures for centuries. That alone confirms their effectiveness. Longhouses may not meet modern standards of comfort, but they functioned. Layered bark and insulation trapped heat. Hearths provided warmth and smoke for preservation. Daily care prevented collapse. Survival itself is the evidence. Communities thrived, raised children, and shared stories through countless winters without succumbing to cold. Still, everyday life was far from tidy. Condensation dripped like indoor rain. Fleas and lice turned bedding into battlegrounds. Dogs claimed prime spots by the fire. Chickens squawked beneath the hides. The Longhouse was part home, part menagerie. Outsiders mocked these inconveniences, but those who lived there understood. Imperfection did not mean failure. You could itch, cough, and still reach spring. Scholars debate how warm these interiors truly were. Some reconstructions suggest temperatures hovered just above freezing, enough to survive, but never enough for comfort. Others describe interiors stifling with smoke, forcing visitors outside gasping. Perhaps this uncertainty is appropriate. Conditions likely changed night to night, even hour to hour, depending on storms, fire size, and household discipline. Warmth was never constant. It was a negotiation with nature. The sensory experience leaves a mark. The creak of bark panels under snow. The scent of cedar and sage smoldering with smoke. The rough touch of deer hide against your cheek, warm and oily. Breath rising in unison toward the rafters. Sparks drifting through smoke holes into the dark. Even discomforts, the moisture dripping, pests biting, smoke-induced coughs, form part of a larger texture. Together, they create a tapestry of endurance. A curious detail, some accounts say snow was deliberately allowed to pile against outer walls, turning storms into allies. Drifts added insulation, muffled wind, and sealed cracks. What seemed dangerous became protective. It's a small, clever example of turning hardship into advantage, the essence of longhouse survival. Symbolically, the longhouse teaches that warmth isn't given, it's created. It requires cooperation, splitting wood, gathering moss, cooking food, sharing hides, telling stories. Survival was communal. Alone, no one could withstand drafts and storms. Together, pressed body to body over generations, people not only survived but built societies rich in ritual, humor, and resilience. As night wanes, you feel the weight of furs, the heat of clustered bodies, the glow of embers. Outside, snow continues, but it no longer threatens. The house has proven itself, enduring another winter night. You breathe in, grateful for the ingenuity that turned bark, moss, smoke, and stories into architecture for survival. As sleep claims you, one thought remains. The cold never disappeared. It pressed at the walls all night, sharp and insistent, but it was slowed and softened, not by a single miracle, but by countless small acts woven together. That is how Native Americans slept in longhouses without freezing. Now, as we leave the smoky rafters and crowded bunks, it's time to rest. Picture the final embers glowing like sleepy eyes, the last crackle of wood fading. The storm outside softens into snowdrifts, distant and quiet. Your body sinks into layered hides. Warmth, earned through fire, breath, and closeness, wraps you like a cocoon. Moss seams, firewood, drips, and pests fade from thought. What remains is the rhythm of life, breath rising and falling, hearts beating quietly, a community holding itself against the night. Imagine the rafters above, where tools and food hang preserved by smoke. The rustle of feathers from a bird under hides. A dog shifting closer to your feet. Every sound softened by time, wrapped in haze. The air is gentle. Smoke thins to a pale veil, filtering firelight into a dreamlike glow, blurring edges until the longhouse feels less a structure of bark and pole and more a cradle between earth and sky. Breathe deeply. Let the story dissolve into warmth. Winter waits outside. Inside, you are safe, wrapped in layers of care and ingenuity. Close your eyes. Rest easy. The long night has been endured,